I explored an abandoned farmhouse in rural Kentucky that local urbex forums said had been empty since the 1970s, and what started as a routine documentation job became something I still can't fully explain or accept. I'd been doing urban exploration for 3 years, photographing abandoned places and posting the images online, and this farmhouse had been on my list for months. The forum post that mentioned it was sparse on details, just coordinates, a note that the family had left suddenly, and a comment about unusual architecture that I'd assumed meant quirky additions or rooms built at odd angles. The drive out took 2 hours from Louisville, the last 30 minutes on progressively smaller roads, until I was on a gravel track that barely qualified as a driveway. The house sat in an overgrown clearing, a 2-story white farmhouse with peeling paint and a sagging porch. From the outside, it looked completely ordinary standard, Kentucky farmhouse architecture, probably built in the 1920s or 30s, with the kind of symmetrical facade that was common in rural construction from that era. I parked and did my usual perimeter walk, checking for structural damage, looking for the safest entry point, taking exterior shots for documentation. The house appeared sound despite its age and abandonment. No obvious collapses, the roof mostly intact, windows broken but the frame solid. I found an unlocked back door and entered through the kitchen, stepping carefully on floors that creaked but held my weight. The interior was exactly what I expected from a house abandoned in the 1970s. Avocado green appliances in the kitchen, floral wallpaper peeling from the walls, furniture covered in decades of dust. The air was thick and stale, carrying that distinctive smell of long-closed spaces, mildew, and old wood, and something indefinable that all abandoned houses seem to share. I pulled out my camera and started documenting. I moved methodically through the ground floor, photographing each room and making notes. Kitchen with the green appliances and a Formica table. Living room with a floral couch and a console television. Dining room with a wooden table and 6 chairs. A bathroom with pink tiles and a clawfoot tub. 2 bedrooms, both with iron bed frames and dressers. 6 rooms total on the ground floor, arranged in a sensible layout around a central hallway that ran from the front door to the back. I spent about 45 minutes on the ground floor, taking my time, getting shots from different angles, checking closets and drawers for anything interesting. Then I headed upstairs to document the 2nd floor. The stairs creaked alarmingly but held, and I emerged into a hallway with 4 doors, 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, and what looked like a small storage room or office. Standard layout, nothing unusual. I photographed everything, noted the peeling wallpaper and water damage on one ceiling, documented a broken window in the larger bedroom. The 2nd floor took me maybe an hour total. I was thorough, opening every drawer, checking every closet, looking for the kind of personal items that sometimes get left behind and tell stories about the people who live there. I found some old magazines from 1973, a few articles of clothing, nothing particularly interesting. When I was satisfied I'd documented everything, I headed back downstairs. That's when I noticed the hallway had changed. I remembered the ground floor hallway clearly. It ran straight from the front door to the back door, with rooms opening off both sides. 6 rooms total, 3 on each side. But now the hallway was longer. It extended past where I remembered it ending, and there were additional doors. I counted 8 doors total now instead of 6. I stopped and stared, my brain trying to reconcile what I was seeing with what I knew I'd documented an hour ago. I pulled out my camera and reviewed the photos I'd taken of the ground floor. They clearly showed 6 rooms. The hallway ended at the back door, with blank wall on either side. But now, standing in that same hallway, I could see it continued for another 10 feet past where the back door should be, and there were 2 additional doors I hadn't photographed. I approached the new doors slowly, my skin prickling with unease. The first door opened into a bedroom, identical to the other 2 bedrooms I'd photographed. Same iron bed frame, same style of dresser, same peeling floral wallpaper. But this room hadn't existed an hour ago. I'd photographed blank wall where this door now stood. I checked my photos again, zooming in on the hallway shots. Definitely 6 rooms, definitely blank wall where these new doors were. I was looking at physical proof that the house had been smaller an hour ago than it was now. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd been disoriented, had somehow missed these rooms on my first pass. But I knew that wasn't true. I was methodical in my explorations, had documented hundreds of buildings, never missed entire rooms. And the photos confirmed what I knew: the house had changed. I decided to go back upstairs and come down again, thinking maybe I'd somehow confuse myself about the layout. I climbed the stairs, my heart beating faster than the exertion warranted, and looked around the second floor. Still 4 rooms, same as before. I went back downstairs. 10 rooms now. The hallway had extended further, and 2 more doors had appeared. I stood there in growing panic, watching the hallway stretch away from me. Doors standing where I absolutely knew there had been wall just minutes before. I opened one of the new rooms. Bedroom, identical to all the others. Same furniture, same dust, same sense of having been abandoned in the 1970s. I took photos, documented it, then opened the next new room. Another bedroom, exactly the same. The rational part of my mind was screaming that this was impossible, that houses don't grow, that rooms don't appear out of nothing. But I was standing in those rooms, touching the furniture, seeing the dust I disturbed with my footsteps. They were real. They existed, and they hadn't existed an hour ago. I went upstairs again, faster this time, and immediately came back down. 12 rooms. The hallway now extended far beyond where the back door should be. Rooms branching off in configurations that made no architectural sense. I was losing track of the original layout. Couldn't remember which rooms I documented first and which had appeared later. I started taking photos frantically, trying to document the impossibility of what was happening. But every time I went upstairs and came back down, the ground floor had added more rooms. 14 rooms, 16 rooms. The hallway branched now, creating side corridors I was certain hadn't existed. The rooms were all furnished identically, all showed the same signs of abandonment, all felt equally real and solid. I tried to find the back door I'd entered through, thinking I'd just leave and process this from outside, from safety. But the hallway configuration had changed so much I couldn't orient myself. I walked what I thought was the path back to the kitchen, but I ended up in a bedroom. I tried again, ended up in a different bedroom. The rooms were multiplying faster now, the house adding space with each moment, and I was getting lost in a building that should have been small and simple. Panic set in fully. I ran, not caring which direction, just trying to find an exit. I passed bedroom after bedroom, all identical, all empty, all covered in the same thick dust. The hallways branched and twisted, creating a maze where there should have been a straightforward path. I could see windows in some rooms, could see daylight outside, but every door I tried opened into another bedroom, never to the outside. I don't know how long I ran through that house. It felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Eventually, I burst through a door and found myself outside, stumbling onto overgrown grass, gasping for air. I turned to look at the house, and it appeared completely normal. 2 stories, standard farmhouse proportions, the same dimensions I'd observed when I arrived. I walked around the exterior, counting windows, trying to calculate how many rooms could fit inside a house that size. 6, maybe 8 rooms per floor maximum given the building's footprint. Not the dozens I'd just run through, not the endless branching hallways and multiplying bedrooms. I got in my car and drove away, my hands shaking on the wheel. When I got home, I reviewed my photos and videos. The early shots showed the house as it should be 6 rooms on the ground floor, normal layout. But as my documentation progressed, the images started showing the changes. More doors, longer hallways, rooms appearing in impossible spaces. The timestamps on the photos confirmed what I'd experienced. The house had changed, grown, added space while I was inside it. I researched the property records. The house was built in 1927, with 6 rooms, total 4 downstairs, 2 upstairs. No additions, no renovations, no structural changes recorded in over 90 years. The family who'd lived there last, the Harpers, had left in 1973, abandoning the house fully furnished. No one seemed to know why they'd left or where they'd gone. I tried to find other explorers who'd been in that house, posted about my experience on the forum where I'd first found the location. Got a few responses from people who'd attempted to explore it but had left quickly, feeling disoriented or uncomfortable. One person said they'd felt like the house was bigger on the inside than the outside, but hadn't stayed long enough to confirm it. Another said they'd gone upstairs and come down to find different furniture than they'd seen before, but had attributed it to memory error. I went back once, 3 weeks later, thinking maybe I'd imagined it, maybe it had been some kind of stress-induced episode. I made it as far as the back door, the same door I'd entered through before. But when I looked into the kitchen, I could see the hallway beyond it, and it was already wrong. The hallway was too long, extended too far for the house's exterior dimensions. I could see doors lining it, more doors than should exist. I didn't go inside. I've driven past the house a few times since then, always during the day, always staying in my car. From the outside, it remains completely normal, a standard abandoned farmhouse, slowly succumbing to weather and time. But I know what's inside. I know the house adds rooms, expands its interior space, creates an impossible geography that doesn't match its exterior boundaries. I've tried to understand what I experienced, researched spatial anomalies, looked for other reports of buildings that are larger inside than outside, found a few scattered accounts but nothing definitive. I've wondered if the house exists partially in folded space, or if it's some kind of dimensional overlap, or if there's a completely mundane explanation I'm missing because my brain can't accept what I saw. But I have the photos. I have timestamps showing rooms appearing where wall had been minutes before. I have images of hallways extending beyond where the house's exterior walls should be. I have proof that what I experienced was real, even if I can't explain it. I don't do urban exploration anymore. Can't bring myself to enter abandoned buildings. Can't trust that the space inside matches the space outside. Can't shake the fear that I'll walk into another structure that grows and changes and traps me in an expanding maze of identical rooms. The Kentucky farmhouse taught me that architecture isn't always stable, that interior space can be fluid and deceptive, that sometimes a house decides to be larger than it should be. I still have nightmares about it, about running through endless bedrooms, all identical, all abandoned, all multiplying around me faster than I can map them, about trying to find an exit that keeps moving, doors that lead to more rooms instead of outside, hallways that branch and extend and create new paths while I'm trying to follow the old ones, about being trapped inside a building that grows faster than I can escape it, adding room after room after room until I'm so deep in its impossible interior that I'll never find my way out. The house is still there, still standing in that overgrown clearing in rural Kentucky, still looking normal from the outside, still appearing to be a simple 6-room farmhouse. But inside, it's something else. Something that doesn't follow normal rules about space and dimension and architectural possibility. Something that grows when you're not looking, that adds rooms and hallways and creates an interior larger than its exterior could ever contain. And sometimes I think about the Harper family, about why they left so suddenly in 1973, abandoning everything they owned. I think about whether they experienced what I experienced, whether they watched their house grow and change and multiply around them, whether they escaped before it grew too large, before the rooms multiplied too many times, before the house expanded so far that finding an exit became impossible, or whether they're still in there, lost in an endless maze of identical bedrooms, still trying to find the door they entered through, still walking hallways that extend further with every step they take, still trapped inside a house that decided to be infinite, that chose to expand beyond its boundaries, that created space where space shouldn't exist and filled it with rooms that go on forever. I hope they got out, but I'm not sure they did, and I'm not sure anyone else should try. I was documenting an abandoned Victorian in upstate New York, a 3-story mansion that had been a tuberculosis sanatorium in the early 1900s, and what I found in the basement has made me question everything I thought I knew about architecture and physical space. The house had been on my exploration list for over a year, a massive brick structure sitting on the outskirts of a small town that had once been a treatment facility for tuberculosis patients, back when fresh air and isolation were considered the best cure. It had been abandoned since the 1960s when modern antibiotics made sanatoriums obsolete, and it stood empty and slowly deteriorating, waiting for someone to decide what to do with it. The building was impressive from the outside, 3 full stories of red brick with elaborate Victorian gingerbread trim, tall windows, and a slate roof that was mostly intact despite decades of neglect. I'd done my research before arriving, studying old photographs and floor plans from when it had been operational. The layout was straightforward patient rooms on the upper floors, common areas and medical facilities on the ground floor, and a basement level that contained the furnace, laundry facilities, and storage. According to the original plans, there was also a sub-basement for additional storage, accessed by stairs from the main basement level. I entered through a side door that had been forced open by previous explorers, stepping into what had been a service corridor. The interior was in better condition than I'd expected, peeling paint and water damage, certainly, but the structure was sound, and most of the architectural details were intact. I spent the first few hours documenting the ground floor and the upper levels, photographing the long hallways of patient rooms, the communal spaces with their tall windows designed to let in healing sunlight, the medical examination rooms with their vintage equipment still in place. By late afternoon, I'd worked my way through the main floors and was ready to explore the basement. I found the stairs leading down a sturdy wooden staircase that descended from the ground floor into darkness. My headlamp cut through the gloom as I made my way down, counting steps out of habit, 15 steps, which was standard for a basement descent, and I emerged into a large open space with a concrete floor and exposed ceiling joists. The basement level was exactly as the floor plans had indicated. I could see the old coal furnace, massive and rusted, dominating one corner. There were storage rooms filled with abandoned furniture and equipment, a laundry area with industrial washers still in place, and various mechanical spaces that had once kept the sanatorium running. The ceiling was maybe 8 feet high, the space well lit by my headlamp and the dim light filtering down from windows at ground level. I found the stairs to the sub-basement in the back corner, exactly where the floor plan said they should be. The original documents had described the sub-basement as a smaller storage area, used primarily for coal storage, and as a root cellar back when the building had been a private residence before being converted to a sanatorium. I expected maybe another 8 or 10 feet of descent, a cramped storage space, nothing unusual. The stairs were wooden, narrower than the main basement stairs, and they descended at a steeper angle. I counted as I went down 5 steps, 10 steps, 15 steps. The stairs showed no sign of ending. 20 steps, 25. The construction remained identical the entire way down, same worn wooden treads, same simple railing, same narrow walls on either side. 30 steps, 35. I should have reached the sub-basement long ago, but the stairs just kept going. At 40 steps, I finally reached the bottom. I was standing in a space that resembled the main basement but felt fundamentally different. The ceiling was lower, maybe 7 feet instead of 8. The walls were closer together, creating a more confined feeling. The temperature had dropped noticeably. I could see my breath fogging in the beam of my headlamp. The concrete floor was the same, but everything else felt compressed, squeezed down, as if I descended into a smaller version of the basement above. I explored this level briefly, finding storage rooms similar to those on the main basement level but smaller, more cramped. And in the back corner, I found another staircase leading down. This didn't make sense. The sub-basement was supposed to be the lowest level, but here were stairs, identical in construction to the ones I'd just descended, disappearing into darkness below. I should have turned back then, should have recognized that something was fundamentally wrong with this building, that basements don't descend indefinitely, that the stairs should have ended at the sub-basement. But curiosity and professional habit pushed me forward. I wanted to document this, to understand what I was seeing, to find some logical explanation for stairs that led down when there shouldn't be anywhere further to go. I started descending the second staircase, counting again. The steps were identical to the previous set. Same wood, same wear patterns, same narrow walls. 10 steps, 20 steps, 30 steps. The air got colder with each step down, my breath coming out in thick clouds now. 40 steps, 50 steps. My headlamp beam seemed dimmer somehow, the darkness pressing in more heavily. 60 steps, and I finally reached another level. This basement was smaller still. The ceiling was maybe 6 feet high now, low enough that I had to duck slightly to avoid the joists. The walls were closer together, creating corridors so narrow I could touch both sides with my arms extended. The cold was intense, a damp chill that seemed to seep through my clothes and settle into my bones. And in the back corner, predictably, impossibly, there were more stairs leading down. I stood there for a long time, trying to make sense of what I was experiencing. I descended at least 100 steps from the main basement, probably equivalent to 8 or 9 floors in a normal building. I should be far below ground level, deeper than any building foundation should go. But the stairs kept descending, and each level I reached looked like a compressed, colder version of the basement above it. I went back up, climbing both sets of stairs, emerging into the main basement with relief. I descended twice and returned to familiar space. I could see the ground-level windows, could orient myself to the building's position. I measured the distance from the ground floor to the main basement, about 10 feet, normal for a Victorian-era building. I went outside and examined the foundation. It was standard brick and stone construction, extending maybe 8 feet below ground level at most. There was no physical way the stairs I'd descended could exist within this building's footprint, but they did exist. I'd walked them, counted the steps, stood in the spaces they led to. I had photographs of the lower levels, temperature readings showing the progressive cold, documentation that proved I'd been somewhere, even if that somewhere didn't make architectural sense. I've been back to that building 6 times over the past year, and each time I've descended further into the basement levels. On my second visit, I made it to the 3rd level below the sub-basement, descending another 70 steps to reach a space where the ceiling was so low I had to crouch, where the walls were so close I could barely move through the corridors. The furnace and storage rooms had compressed into tiny versions of themselves, equipment shrinking to fit the reduced space. On my 3rd visit, I reached the 4th level, descending 90 steps through increasingly cold air to reach a basement where I had to crawl in places, the ceiling barely 4 feet high, the corridors so narrow my shoulders brushed both walls simultaneously. The cold was severe enough that my headlamp battery drained faster than normal, the light flickering and dimming until I was navigating by touch as much as sight. The 5th level, reached on my 4th visit, required 110 steps to descend. The space was barely navigable, ceiling 3 feet high, walls so close I had to turn sideways to move through them. The temperature had to be well below freezing, ice forming on the walls and floor, my breath coming out in thick clouds that hung in the air like fog. On my 6th visit, just last month, I reached what I think is the 7th level, though I've lost track of the exact count. I descended over 150 steps, the stairs never changing in construction, never showing signs of ending. The level I reached had a ceiling less than 5 feet high, forcing me to move in a permanent crouch. The walls were so close I could touch both sides without extending my arms fully. The cold was extreme, my extremities going numb within minutes despite my winter gear. And the stairs continued down. I could see them in my headlamp beam, descending into darkness, the same wooden construction, the same worn treads, but the space had compressed so much that I couldn't fit through the opening. The stairway entrance was maybe 2 feet wide, 3 feet high, too small for me to squeeze through, even if I'd wanted to continue descending. I've tried to find logical explanations. I've researched the building's history, looking for evidence of mining operations or unusual construction techniques that might explain the deep basement levels. Found nothing. The sanatorium was built on solid bedrock, with no history of mining or excavation beyond the standard basement. I've consulted with architects and structural engineers, describing what I've found without revealing the location. They all say the same thing: what I'm describing is impossible, that basement stairs can't descend for hundreds of feet, that space can't compress the way I'm describing. But I have the documentation. I have photographs from each level, showing the progressive compression of space, the lowering of ceilings, the narrowing of walls. I have temperature readings showing the descent from normal basement temperature to well below freezing. I have step counts and measurements that prove I've descended far deeper than the building's foundation could possibly extend. I've measured the building from every angle. The foundation is standard, the basement is normal depth. From outside, there's no indication of the deep levels that exist inside. It's as if the stairs are descending through folded space, each level existing in a pocket dimension that's compressed from the one above it, the building somehow extending downward through layers of reality that don't occupy normal physical space. I think about the sanatorium's history, about the tuberculosis patients who came here to die in the early 1900s. I wonder if something about all that death, all that suffering, all those people descending into the building to never leave, created these lower levels. If the weight of death literally pressed down, creating deeper and deeper spaces, compressing them as they descended, until the basement became an infinite descent through progressively smaller versions of itself. I think about going back, about descending those stairs one more time to see if I can fit through the narrow opening to the 8th level, about following the stairs down as far as they go, documenting every level until the space becomes too small to navigate or until the cold becomes too extreme to survive, about finding the bottom, if there is a bottom, if the stairs don't just descend forever through increasingly compressed spaces. But I'm afraid of what I might find down there. Afraid that at some level, in some compressed basement far below where any building should extend, I'll find the tuberculosis patients who never left. The ones who descended into the sanatorium and kept descending, following stairs that led them down through layer after layer of cold, compressed space until they were too deep to ever return, trapped in basements that exist hundreds of feet below the building's foundation, still waiting for a cure that never came. I've started having dreams about those stairs, about descending endlessly through progressively smaller spaces, the ceiling lowering with each level, the walls closing in, the cold intensifying until I can barely move, can barely breathe, can barely fit through the spaces I'm crawling through. About reaching a level so compressed that I'm stuck, unable to move forward or back, trapped in a basement so small and cold and deep that no one will ever find me. The building is still there, still standing on the outskirts of that small town in upstate New York, still looking normal from the outside, still appearing to have a standard basement and sub-basement, but inside, the stairs keep going down, down through levels that shouldn't exist, through spaces that compress and cool and narrow with each descent, through basements that exist far below where any physical structure could reach. And I know that one day I'll go back. One day I'll descend those stairs again, compelled by the need to find the bottom, to reach the lowest level, to see where the stairs finally end. I'll squeeze through spaces too small for comfort, will descend through cold so intense it numbs my thoughts, will keep going down long after I should turn back. And maybe I'll find the bottom. Maybe the stairs do end somewhere, in some final compressed basement, at the absolute limit of how far down this building extends. Or maybe they go on forever, descending through infinite levels of progressively smaller space, stairs that lead down through folded reality into depths that have no bottom, no end, no escape. Either way, I don't think I'll be coming back up. An abandoned Art Deco apartment building in Detroit had been on my exploration list for months, known among urban explorers for its intact original features, including dozens of ornate mirrors, and what I saw in those mirrors has made me question not just my own past, but whether the person I am now is the person I was supposed to become. The building was a 12-story structure built in 1929, one of those grand apartment complexes that had once housed Detroit's upper middle class before the city's long decline left it empty and forgotten. It had been abandoned since the 1980s, and while the exterior showed the typical decay, broken windows, graffiti, crumbling brickwork, the interior was remarkably preserved, particularly the mirrors. The building's reputation among explorers centered on those mirrors. Art Deco design favored mirrors as architectural elements, using them to create illusions of space and light, and this building had them everywhere. The lobby alone had 3 massive mirrors, each covering an entire wall, framed in geometric chrome and etched glass that was characteristic of the period. Every floor had mirrors in the hallways, in the apartments, even in the stairwells. The building was a palace of reflection, designed to multiply light and create visual grandeur. I arrived on a gray November afternoon, parking in an alley behind the building and entering through a service entrance that previous explorers had forced open. The lobby was dim but still retained its Art Deco elegance, geometric floor tiles, chrome fixtures, that distinctive style of ornamental excess that defined the era, and the mirrors, massive and ornate, still hung on the walls despite decades of abandonment. I approached the main mirror, the largest one covering the entire north wall of the lobby, and that's when I first noticed something was wrong. My reflection looked back at me, moving when I moved, matching my gestures perfectly. But I wasn't wearing the right clothes. In the mirror, I saw myself in a brown leather jacket I'd worn the day before, not the black canvas jacket I was currently wearing. And my hair was different, longer, the way it had been before I'd trimmed it that morning. I stopped and stared, my brain struggling to process the discrepancy. I looked down at myself, confirming what I was wearing: black jacket, jeans, hiking boots. Then back at the mirror, brown leather jacket, same jeans, same boots. The jacket I'd definitely worn yesterday, paired with the haircut I definitely had yesterday morning. I moved my hand, and the reflection moved its hand in perfect synchronization. I turned my head, and the reflection turned its head at exactly the same time. The movements were matching, but the appearance was wrong. I was looking at myself from 24 hours ago, somehow captured and displayed in this mirror, while my actual present self stood in front of it. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the mirror. The image showed what I was seeing myself in yesterday's clothes with yesterday's haircut, despite the fact that my phone's front camera showed me in today's clothes. I took a selfie to confirm. The selfie showed me correctly, as I actually appeared, but the mirror behind me in that selfie showed the yesterday version. I moved to the second large mirror in the lobby, this one on the east wall. Same phenomenon. Yesterday's clothes, yesterday's hair, yesterday's version of me moving in perfect sync with my current movements. I checked the third mirror. Same thing. Every mirror in the lobby was showing me as I'd been exactly 24 hours earlier. I started testing the mirrors methodically. I raised my right hand, the reflection raised its right hand simultaneously. I turned in a circle, the reflection turned in perfect synchronization. The movements were matching exactly, no delay, no lag. But the person moving was wearing different clothes, had different hair, looked like a version of me from yesterday, somehow frozen in the reflection. I went through my memory of the previous day, trying to recall what I'd been doing at this exact time around 3 in the afternoon. I'd been at home, editing photos from a previous exploration, wearing that brown leather jacket because my apartment had been cold. I'd been sitting at my computer, probably moving my hands on the keyboard, probably turning my head to look at reference materials. And in these mirrors, I could see that version of me moving, performing actions I remembered doing 24 hours ago, but synchronized perfectly with my current movements. I decided to explore the upper floors, to see if other mirrors showed the same phenomenon. I found the stairwell Art Deco ironwork, still elegant despite rust, and climbed to the second floor. The hallway had mirrors at each end, and when I looked into them, I saw myself from 2 days ago. Different clothes entirely, the jacket I'd worn on Thursday, hair that was slightly longer than even yesterday's version. The reflection moved with me, perfectly synchronized, but showing a version of me from 48 hours in the past. I climbed to the third floor. The mirrors there showed me from 3 days ago. I recognized the shirt immediately, a gray pullover I'd worn on Wednesday and hadn't worn since. The haircut was even longer, the way it had been before my Thursday trim. I was watching myself from 72 hours in the past, moving in real time, perfectly synchronized despite the temporal gap. The pattern became clear as I climbed higher. Each floor showed me from 1 additional day in the past. 4th floor, 4 days ago. 5th floor, 5 days. I was ascending through my own history, watching progressively older versions of myself move in mirrors that somehow captured and displayed the past while remaining perfectly synchronized with the present. On the 6th floor, I saw myself wearing clothes I'd almost forgotten, a jacket I'd worn exactly a week ago for about an hour before changing because it had been too warm. Seeing it in the mirror triggered the memory, and I could recall that day, that decision, that version of myself who thought the weather would be colder than it turned out to be. 7th floor, 1 week ago. I looked healthier in these mirrors, the reflection showing me before I'd caught the cold that was still lingering in my system. My face was less tired, my posture straighter, my eyes clearer. It was strange seeing the difference a week of minor illness could make, seeing how I deteriorated slightly, without fully noticing it day by day. 8th floor, 9 days ago. I barely recognized some of the clothes now items I wore, so rarely I'd forgotten I owned them. But seeing them in the mirror brought back specific memories, specific days, specific moments from over a week in my past. 9th floor, 10 days ago. The mirrors here showed me from before I'd started my current exploration project, before I'd committed to documenting Detroit's abandoned buildings. I looked different, less purposeful somehow, more uncertain, like I hadn't yet found the focus that the project had given me. 10th floor, 12 days ago. The reflection showed me looking notably healthier before the cold had started, before I'd been sleeping poorly, before the stress of deadlines and life had worn me down. I looked almost like a different person, better rested, less worried, carrying myself with more confidence. I kept climbing, compelled now to see how far back these mirrors could reach, how much of my past they could display. 11th floor, 15 days ago. I saw myself in clothes I'd completely forgotten, performing movements that triggered no specific memories because they were too far back, too ordinary to have been memorable. On the 12th floor, the top floor, I found mirrors showing me from over 3 weeks ago. But these reflections looked different in a more fundamental way. This version of me looked happier, less worn down, moving with an ease I didn't remember having. I stared at that reflection, trying to understand what had changed between that version and the current me. Then I realized what I was seeing. This was me from before I'd started urban exploration seriously, before I'd committed to spending my weekends in abandoned buildings photographing decay. This was me from when I'd had different hobbies, different routines, different priorities, and I looked happier, less tired, less cynical, less affected by the constant exposure to abandonment and decay that had become my primary recreational activity. I sat down in that 12th floor hallway, surrounded by mirrors showing a version of myself I barely recognized, and I started questioning everything. These mirrors weren't just showing the past, they were showing me the path I'd taken to get here, the incremental changes that had transformed me from that happier person into the tired explorer, sitting on dusty floorboards in an abandoned building. I looked from mirror to mirror, watching that 3 weeks ago version of myself move in sync with my current movements, but showing a person who looked fundamentally different. Not in any single obvious way, but in the overall impression, the way I held myself, the expression on my face, the energy in my movements. That version of me had something I'd lost, some quality I'd traded away in exchange for the pursuit of photographing abandoned spaces. I thought about going higher, about finding the roof access and seeing if there were mirrors there, showing me from even further back, showing me from months ago, or years, or from before major life decisions that had shaped who I became, showing me versions of myself that had made different choices, taken different paths, become different people. But I didn't go to the roof. I sat there on the 12th floor, staring at mirrors, showing a happier version of myself from 3 weeks ago, and I started to cry. Not dramatic sobs, just quiet tears, because I was looking at evidence of my own decline. Proof that I'd been slowly wearing myself down, slowly becoming more tired and cynical and isolated, and I hadn't even noticed it happening. I eventually left the building, descending through floors that showed me my own recent history in reverse, watching myself get progressively more like my current self as I descended. Each floor was a step closer to now, a step further from that happier version I'd seen on the 12th floor. By the time I reached the lobby, the mirrors were showing yesterday's version again, and I could see clearly how even in one day, I'd become slightly more tired, slightly more worn. I haven't been back to that building. I've thought about it constantly, about those mirrors and what they showed me, about the progression from happy to worn that I documented in my own reflections across 12 floors. I've wondered if the mirrors were showing the actual past, or if they were showing something else, alternate versions of me, paths not taken, people I could have been if I'd made different choices. I've also wondered what I'd see if I went back now, after several weeks have passed. Would the lobby mirrors still show yesterday's version, or would they show the version from the day I was last there? Would the 12th floor show that happier version from 3 weeks before my first visit, or would it show me from 3 weeks ago now, which would be after my first visit, after I'd seen what those mirrors showed me? I've wondered if going back would create some kind of loop, if I'd see myself in the mirrors from my previous visit, watch myself, creating infinite regress of observation. I've wondered if the mirrors would show me the version of myself who was changed by seeing those mirrors, who started questioning his choices and his path after being confronted with evidence of his own decline. Most of all, I've wondered about that happier version I saw on the 12th floor. I've tried to remember what was different 3 weeks before that visit, what I was doing differently, what I had that I lost. I've tried to identify the specific moment when I started looking more worn, more tired, more affected by the work I'd chosen to do. I've changed some things since that visit. I explore less frequently now, spend more time on other activities, try to take better care of myself. But I can't shake the feeling that the damage is already done, that the path I've taken has already shaped me in ways I can't undo, that the progression from happy to worn is a one-way journey, and seeing it documented in those mirrors doesn't mean I can reverse it. Sometimes I think about the top floor, about whether there are more mirrors above the 12th floor, in the penthouse or on the roof, about what I'd see there, versions of me from months ago, from years ago, from before major life changes and decisions. Happier versions, healthier versions, versions who made different choices and became different people. I think about whether those mirrors would show me alternative paths, versions of myself who never started exploring abandoned buildings, who chose different careers or relationships or cities. Whether I'd see myself as I could have been, should have been, might have been if circumstances had been different. But I don't go back. I don't climb to the top floor. I don't look for the mirrors that would show me my furthest past or my alternative presence, because I'm afraid of what I'd see. Afraid of finding versions of myself that are so much happier, so much healthier, So much better than what I've become that the comparison would be unbearable. The building is still there, still standing in Detroit, still full of mirrors that show the past, or show alternative selves, or show whatever it is they show. And somewhere on the 12th floor, there's a mirror showing a version of me from 3 weeks before I first entered that building, a version who looks happier and healthier and more whole than I may ever be again. And I'll never know what the 13th floor would have shown if there had been a 13th floor. Never know how far back those mirrors could reach, how many versions of myself they could display, how many paths not taken they could reveal. I only know that seeing 12 floors was enough to show me that I've been declining without noticing. Enough to prove that the path I've taken has worn me down incrementally, day by day, until the accumulated weight of all those days has transformed me into someone I barely recognize. The mirrors showed me the past, or they showed me alternate presents, or they showed me something else entirely that I don't have words for. But whatever they showed, it was true. And truth, when it's about your own decline, is the hardest thing to see. I was exploring an abandoned colonial in Massachusetts, built in 1784, when I noticed my phone's clock was running backwards, and what started as a minor technical glitch became evidence that the house was reversing time itself, slowly undoing everything that happened within its walls. The colonial was located in a rural area west of Boston, a massive 2-story structure that had been built by a wealthy merchant family and abandoned in the 1950s after the last family member died without heirs. It had sat empty for over 70 years, slowly decaying, and I'd gotten permission from the property management company to document it before it was demolished to make way for a housing development. The house was beautiful in that austere colonial way, symmetrical facade, 12 over 12 windows, central chimney, all built from hand-hewn timbers and brick that had been fired locally. The interior retained most of its original features, despite decades of abandonment, wide plank floors, enormous fireplaces, hand-carved woodwork that spoke to the craftsmanship of 18th century builders. It was the kind of place that should have been preserved as a historical site, but the cost of restoration was prohibitive, and the property was worth more as cleared land. I entered through the front door, which hung slightly ajar on its original iron hinges, and started my documentation in the entrance hall. The light coming through the dirty windows was dim and gray, filtering through centuries of grime, and I used my headlamp to supplement the ambient light as I photographed architectural details and took notes on the building's condition. I'd been working for maybe 20 minutes when I pulled out my phone to check the time and noticed something odd. The clock was running strangely, the seconds were advancing and then retreating, ticking forward 1 second and then backward 1 second, so the overall time remained stable, but the display cycled in a way that made no sense. I thought it was a software glitch, maybe some conflict with the GPS or a failing battery, and I dismissed it as one of those minor technical annoyances that plague digital devices. But then I noticed the dust. The house was thick with it, decades of accumulated dust coating every surface, stirred by my movements into clouds that hung in the air and slowly settled. Except the dust wasn't settling, it was rising. I stopped moving and watched as the particles I disturbed drifted upward instead of down, floating toward the ceiling in slow motion like they were moving through water. Tiny specks of dust, visible in the beam of my headlamp, all traveling in the wrong direction. I stood completely still and watched my footprints. The dust I disturbed when walking across the floor was gradually floating up and resettling on the surface I'd disturbed, filling in my footprints, erasing evidence of my passage. It wasn't happening quickly. It took several minutes of standing motionless to see the effect clearly, but it was definitely happening. The house was reversing the disturbance I'd caused, putting dust back where it had been before I'd walked through it. I started paying closer attention to everything around me. The door I'd opened to enter this room was slowly swinging closed, moving by itself, returning to the position it had been in before I'd pushed it open. A picture frame I'd knocked over while examining a table was slowly righting itself, tilting up degree by degree until it stood upright again. Cobwebs I'd brushed through with my hand were reforming, the broken strands reconnecting and tightening back into their original patterns. The house was reversing time. Not for everything, not dramatically, but subtly, slowly undoing small disturbances and returning things to their previous states. I tested it by deliberately moving objects, pushing a chair across the floor, knocking a book off a shelf, disturbing more dust. Then I stood back and watched. In every case, The objects slowly reversed their movements, sliding back across the floor, floating back onto the shelf, the dust rising and resettling until the disturbance was erased. My breath was condensing on the cold windows, leaving patches of fog on the glass. I watched as the condensation gradually disappeared, not by evaporating normally, but by uncondensing, the moisture pulling back into the air, the clear glass reappearing as if I'd never breathed on it. I spoke aloud, saying a few words, and I heard them echo, but the echo played backwards, the sounds reversing and distorting, as if the house was rewinding my voice. I checked my phone again. The clock was still cycling strangely, 1 second forward and 1 second back, maintaining the same overall time, but showing the reversal that was affecting everything in this house. I took a photo of a room, then walked through it, disturbing dust and moving objects. I waited 5 minutes, then took another photo of the same room. The second photo looked almost identical to the first. The dust had resettled. The objects had returned to their original positions. The disturbance I'd caused had been reversed. I climbed the stairs to the second floor, the steps creaking under my weight. Behind me, I could hear the creaks playing backwards as the boards unflexed, returning to their resting positions with reverse sounds that created an eerie acoustic effect. The second floor had the same temporal reversal, but seemed slightly stronger. I walked into a bedroom and disturbed the dust heavily, dragging my feet to create obvious trails. I watched my watch, not my phone, but my mechanical watch, and saw the dust trails filling in faster here, maybe twice as fast as on the ground floor. In one of the bedrooms, I found a broken window. The glass had shattered at some point, probably years ago, and shards lay on the floor beneath the frame. But as I watched, the glass was slowly repairing itself. The cracks were sealing, the fragments on the floor were rising and fitting back together, the whole window gradually becoming less damaged. It was like watching a video in reverse, except this was happening in real time, in front of me, with no camera or editing involved. I sat down and watched that window for 20 minutes, timing it carefully. The reversal was slow, but steady. Cracks that had been obvious when I'd entered the room were less visible now. Fragments that had been scattered on the floor had risen and reconnected, creating larger pieces. The window wasn't fully repaired. That would probably take days or weeks at this rate, but it was measurably less damaged than when I'd arrived. I started feeling strange. Not sick exactly, but different. My knees, which had been aching from climbing stairs in other abandoned buildings over the past few weeks, suddenly felt better. A headache I'd had all morning faded and disappeared. I rolled up my sleeve and looked at a scar on my forearm, a mark I'd gotten 6 months ago from catching my arm on sharp metal. The scar looked fainter than I remembered, the tissue less raised, the discoloration less obvious. The house was reversing me, not dramatically, not quickly, but my body was being affected by the same temporal reversal that was affecting the dust and the furniture and the broken window. I was being pulled backward through time, my injuries healing, my accumulated wear and fatigue erasing, my body returning to an earlier state. I should have left immediately, should have recognized the danger of staying in a place that was reversing time, that was pulling everything backward toward previous states. But I was fascinated, scientifically curious, documenting this impossible phenomenon with my camera and my notes. I spent another hour on the second floor, watching the reversal effects, testing them with different objects, timing how long it took for disturbances to be erased. By the time I finally decided to leave, I felt noticeably different. Younger somehow, more energetic, the various minor aches and pains I'd accumulated over years of physical activity noticeably reduced. I checked my reflection in a dusty mirror. I looked the same, but there was something about my face that seemed slightly younger, slightly less worn. I left the house through the front door, stepping out into normal time, into a world where dust fell instead of rose and where windows stayed broken instead of slowly repairing themselves. I got in my car and drove home, and over the next few days I became increasingly aware of how much the house had affected me. The scar on my forearm continued to fade, becoming barely visible within a week. The knee pain I'd had didn't return. I felt more energetic, more rested, like I'd shed years of accumulated fatigue in that single hour I'd spent on the second floor. I checked old photos of myself, and I looked younger now than I had in images from 6 months ago, as if I'd been reversed past my current age to some earlier point in my life. I've thought constantly about going back, about spending more time in that house, about letting the reversal continue. about erasing years of wear and damage, about becoming progressively younger, about reversing injuries and illnesses, and all the accumulated effects of living. But I'm terrified of what would happen if I stayed too long, because the house doesn't know when to stop. It just reverses everything continuously, slowly, inexorably. The dust doesn't settle and then rise back up to some equilibrium point. It keeps rising, keeps reversing, presumably until it returns to wherever it came from before it became dust. The broken window doesn't stop repairing it unbroken. It keeps reversing, presumably back through its manufacturing, back to when it was sand and minerals, back to before it existed at all. If I stayed in that house for days or weeks, the reversal would continue. I'd get younger and younger, my body reversing through my adult years, through my adolescence, through my childhood. My injuries and scars wouldn't just heal, they'd unhappen. My body returning to states before those injuries occurred. My memories might start reversing too, unlearning things, unexperiencing events. My consciousness pulled backward through time along with my physical form. And if I stayed long enough, the reversal would pull me back past my birth, back to before I existed, unmake me entirely. I'd reverse through conception, through the biological processes that created me, until I was just potential rather than actual, just possibility rather than person. The house would erase me as thoroughly as it erased footprints in dust, returning me to a state before I'd ever been. I've researched the house's history, looking for explanations. Found very little. The merchant family who built it in 1784 lived there for 4 generations before the line died out in the 1950s. No records of anything unusual, no stories of temporal anomalies or reversed aging, but I did find one interesting detail. The house was built on the site of an earlier structure that had burned down in 1783, killing the family who lived there. And before that, the land had been the site of a Native American settlement that had been abandoned for unknown reasons in the early 1700s. I wonder if something about that location makes time unstable. If the accumulated deaths and abandonments created some kind of temporal disturbance that makes the house want to reverse, to unhappen, to pull everything back towards some earlier state before tragedy and loss occurred. I wonder if the house is trying to save the people who died there, trying to reverse time enough to prevent the fire or the earlier abandonment, caught in an endless loop of reversal that can never quite reach far enough back to change what happened. I've tried to warn the demolition company about what I experienced, but how do you explain that a house reverses time? They think I'm joking or crazy, and the demolition is scheduled for next month. They'll tear down the house, reduce it to rubble, and presumably the rubble will slowly reassemble itself into a house again, the reversal continuing even after the structure is destroyed. Or maybe destroying the house will end the reversal. Maybe bringing the building down will break whatever temporal loop exists there, will allow time to flow normally again, will stop the endless pulling backward toward states that don't exist anymore. But I think about that broken window, about how it was slowly repairing itself, and I wonder if destroying the house might just speed up the reversal. If the demolished rubble might rapidly reconstruct itself, the house rebuilding faster than it's destroyed, time running backwards so strongly that the structure recreates itself over and over, never allowing the demolition to complete. I haven't been back to the house since that first visit 2 months ago. I'm afraid of what would happen if I entered it again. Afraid that the reversal would continue where it left off, that my body would keep getting younger, that I'd start losing years at an accelerating rate. Afraid that I wouldn't be able to leave once the reversal took hold, that I'd be pulled backward faster than I could walk forward, trapped in temporal regression until I ceased to exist. But I also think about it constantly, about how good I felt after spending just an hour on the second floor, about how my scars faded and my pain disappeared and I felt younger and more energetic than I had in years, about how tempting it would be to go back, to spend another hour, to let the reversal continue, to shed more years of accumulated damage. I dream about that house sometimes, about walking through rooms where dust rises instead of falls, where broken things slowly repair themselves, where time flows backward and pulls you with it, about staying there long enough to become young again, to undo years of aging and injury and wear, about the moment when the reversal would pull me past childhood, past infancy, past birth, into non-existence. The house is still there for now, still standing in rural Massachusetts, still reversing time for everything within its walls, still erasing footprints and healing scars and repairing broken windows. still pulling everything backward toward states that existed before, toward conditions that preceded the current ones, toward the infinite regression that would eventually unmake everything that ever was. And I know that one day, probably soon, I'll go back. I'll enter that house again, knowing what it does, knowing the danger. I'll climb to the second floor where the reversal is stronger, and I'll stay. I'll let it pull me backward through time, reverse my aging, undo my injuries, make me younger and younger until I'm no longer the person I am now. And maybe I'll have the strength to leave before the reversal goes too far, before it pulls me back past adulthood, past childhood, past birth. Or maybe I won't. Maybe I'll stay until the house unmakes me completely, until I reverse out of existence, until I return to the state I was in before I was ever born. Either way, the house will still be there, still reversing, still pulling time backward, waiting for the next person who enters, the next disturbance to erase, the next existence to unmake. The house where time runs backwards, where everything that happens slowly unhappens, where the future becomes the past and the past becomes nothing at all. An abandoned Queen Anne Victorian in Portland had an attic that was supposed to be empty, but when I climbed up there, I found my entire life stored in boxes, and I've been slowly disappearing ever since. The house was one of those grand old Victorians that Portland is known for, built in 1892 by a shipping magnate who'd made his fortune in the Pacific trade. It had been in the same family for over a century before the last heir died in the 1990s, and the estate sale had supposedly cleared out everything of value. The house had sat empty for 30 years since then, slowly deteriorating while various developers tried and failed to get permits to renovate or demolish it. I'd gotten permission from the current property owner to document the interior before it was finally sold to a developer who had the political connections to push through the necessary permits. The house was spectacular, even in its decayed turrets and gables. Wraparound porch, stained glass windows, all the ornate Victorian excess that defined the era. The interior was equally impressive, with hand-carved woodwork, elaborate plaster moldings, and a grand staircase that curved up through 3 full stories. I spent most of the day on the lower floors, photographing the architectural details and documenting the condition of the various rooms. By late afternoon, I'd worked my way up to the 3rd floor, and I decided to check the attic before the light failed completely. I found the attic access a narrow stairway, hidden behind a door in the 3rd floor hallway, and climbed up into the space beneath the roof. The attic was supposed to be empty. The estate sale documentation specifically mentioned that the attic had been cleared out along with everything else, that nothing remained in the house except the built-in architectural features. But when I emerged into the attic space, I found it was full. Furniture, stacked boxes, old trunks, all arranged neatly, as if someone had been using this space for storage recently, rather than leaving it abandoned for 3 decades. I started documenting what I found, photographing the items and taking notes. Most of it looked like typical attic storage, old furniture too worn to use but too good to throw away, boxes of books and papers, trunks of clothes and linens. I was opening boxes and cataloging contents when I found the first thing I recognized. It was a toy, a small wooden train engine that I'd owned as a child. Not similar to one I'd owned, identical to it, down to the chip in the red paint on one side and the way the wheels were slightly misaligned. I picked it up, my hands shaking, trying to understand how my childhood toy was in this Portland attic when I'd grown up in Ohio and hadn't seen this toy in over 25 years. I opened another box. Inside were books, and I recognized them too. My 3rd grade reader, the exact edition I'd used in elementary school, with the same cover illustration and the same binding. A novel I'd been obsessed with in 5th grade, a copy so worn the spine was cracked in the same places I remembered from my own reading. These weren't just similar items, they were my items, or perfect replicas of them, stored in an attic of a house I'd never been to before today. I kept opening boxes, my confusion turning to dread as I found more and more things I recognized. A jacket I'd worn in high school and lost during my senior year, here it was, folded neatly in tissue paper, looking exactly as I remembered it. My high school yearbooks, with my signature on the inside, covers in my teenage handwriting. A set of report cards from elementary school, each one showing my grades and my teacher's comments, all in the distinctive handwriting styles I remembered from specific teachers who'd taught me decades ago in a school thousands of miles from Portland. But the people in the photographs were wrong. I found a box of family photos, and they showed scenes from my childhood birthday parties, vacations, Christmas mornings, but my parents' faces were slightly off. The features were close but not exact, like someone had tried to recreate my parents from a description rather than from direct knowledge. My siblings looked wrong too, their faces subtly different from how they actually appeared, close enough to be recognizable but distorted in ways I couldn't quite articulate. It was like someone had collected my memories and tried to make them physical, creating objects and photographs based on my recollections, but getting the details slightly wrong because they only had access to my subjective experience rather than objective reality. I moved deeper into the attic, opening more boxes, finding more of my life stored here. The items became progressively more recent, things from college, from my first job, from relationships I'd had in my 20s. A coffee mug I'd used daily for years before it had broken, and I'd thrown it away. Here it was, unbroken, pristine. A book I'd bought last year and finished reading just months ago. A concert ticket from last summer. At the back of the attic, I found boxes labeled with dates. Last month, last week, 3 days ago. I opened the box labeled 3 days ago and found a receipt from a coffee shop I'd visited on Tuesday. The exact receipt showing the exact drink I'd ordered at the exact time I'd ordered it. A parking ticket from the garage where I'd left my car while I went to a movie. The movie ticket stub itself for the showing I'd attended. I found a box labeled with today's date. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open it. Inside was my car key. Not a copy, not a similar key, my actual key. The one with the distinctive scratch on one side and the worn fob that barely worked anymore. The key I'd used to drive to this house, the key that should be in my jacket pocket right now. I reached into my pocket. It was empty. The key wasn't there. I checked my other pockets, patted myself down frantically, but I knew what I'd find: nothing. The key was in the box. Had always been in the box, according to the impossible logic of this attic. The box was labeled with today's date, meaning this key had been placed here today, had been stored here before I'd even finished using it. I ran from that attic, stumbling down the narrow stairs, through the 3rd floor, down the grand staircase, out the front door. I stood on the porch, breathing hard, trying to process what I'd seen. I checked my pockets again, still no key. I went to my car and tried the door, locked. My key was in a box in an attic, and I was locked out of my car in front of a house that was collecting my life. I called a locksmith, got into my car, drove home. I told myself it had been some kind of elaborate prank, that someone had somehow gotten my key and all those other items and staged this whole thing, but I knew that wasn't true. Some of those items I'd lost decades ago, in different states, in circumstances where no one could have retrieved them. And the photographs, those wrong photographs showing my family with slightly incorrect faces, those weren't something anyone could have staged. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing things missing from my life. Small items at first. A pen I'd been using disappeared, and I had a strong sense that it was now in that attic, stored in a box I hadn't opened yet. A book vanished from my shelf, and I knew it was in Portland now, filed away with all my other books, in boxes organized by the date of disappearance. The disappearances accelerated. Clothes I'd worn recently, dishes I'd used, tools I'd picked up, all of them vanishing within hours or days of use, all of them presumably appearing in that attic in boxes labeled with the dates of their disappearance. I started keeping careful inventory of my possessions, photographing everything, documenting what I owned. But items kept disappearing anyway, pulled from my life and stored in that impossible attic. I went back to the house once, 2 weeks after my first visit. I had to know if the items were really there, if the attic was really collecting my life. I brought a lockpick set and broke in through a side door, climbed to the attic, found more boxes, all labeled with dates from the past 2 weeks. Opened them and found everything I'd lost: the pen, the book, the clothes, all stored neatly, perfectly preserved, waiting in an attic for reasons I couldn't understand. I also found new boxes, labeled with future dates. Tomorrow's date, next week, next month. Boxes that shouldn't exist yet, containing items I presumably still possessed, but that were already stored here, already taken from my life before I'd even noticed they were missing. I opened the box labeled tomorrow. Inside was my phone. Not a similar phone, my phone, with my case, my screen protector with the crack in the corner, my wallpaper visible when I turned it on. The phone that was currently in my pocket, that I'd been using to illuminate the attic was somehow also in this box, labeled with tomorrow's date. I checked my pocket. My phone was still there. I held it up next to the phone in the box. They were identical. Same device, same case, same crack in the screen protector. Somehow both existing simultaneously, one in my hand and one in a box, one still in my possession and one already taken from me and stored here. I left again, more disturbed than before. I've tried to understand what's happening, tried to find some logic to it. The house is collecting my life, storing my existence in physical form, taking items I've used or owned and preserving them in an attic that shouldn't contain anything. But it's not just collecting my past, it's collecting my present and future too, taking things before I'm done with them, storing them in boxes labeled with dates that haven't happened yet. I've researched the house's history, looking for explanations. The shipping magnate who built it had a reputation for collecting things, for obsessively cataloging and preserving items from his travels. His descendants continued the tradition, filling the house with collections of various kinds, books, art, curiosities from around the world. When the last heir died, the estate sale lasted for weeks, dispersing collections that had been accumulated over a century. But apparently they didn't get everything, or maybe the house itself is the collector now, continuing the family tradition by accumulating items without human intervention. Or maybe the house has always been collecting me specifically, has been waiting for me to enter it so it could start gathering my life and storing it in that attic. I've started losing bigger things. My car disappeared from its parking spot last week. I know it's in that attic now, somehow, despite being far too large to fit through the attic access or even through the house's doors. The house is taking things regardless of physical possibility, pulling items from my life and storing them in a space that contains more than it should be able to hold. I've lost people too. Not literally, not yet, but I have photographs that are slowly changing. Pictures of my family are starting to show the wrong faces, the slightly distorted features I saw in the attic photographs. My memories are becoming unreliable, matching the incorrect photographs rather than reality, as if the house is collecting not just my possessions, but my experiences, my relationships, my very identity. I know I should leave Portland, should move far away from that Victorian and its collecting attic. But I don't think distance matters. The house isn't taking things because they're nearby. It's taking them because they're mine, because they're part of my life, because I've owned or used or touched them. It could take my possessions from anywhere, pull them across any distance into boxes labeled with dates, and stored in an attic that grows to accommodate everything it collects. I've started finding empty spaces in my apartment, places where furniture used to be, gaps on shelves where books have disappeared, blank walls where pictures hung. The physical evidence of my life is being systematically removed, item by item, day by day, all of it relocating to Portland, to an attic in an abandoned Victorian, to boxes organized by date and stacked in neat rows. I wonder what will happen when the house finishes collecting my possessions and starts collecting me. Will I disappear piece by piece, body parts vanishing into boxes? Or will I disappear all at once, my entire existence packed away in a box labeled with the date of my final disappearance, stored in an attic alongside everything else that made up my life? I've considered going back to that house and burning it down, destroying the attic and everything in it, but I'm afraid of what would happen to me if my collected life was destroyed. Would I disappear completely, erased along with the physical evidence of my existence? Or would the destruction break the connection, free me from being collected, allow me to keep what remains of my life? I don't know, and I'm running out of time to decide, because I checked my apartment this morning and found a box I didn't pack, labeled with next week's date. Inside was a photograph of me standing in that attic, surrounded by boxes, looking directly at the camera with an expression of resigned acceptance. I'm wearing clothes I haven't worn yet, standing in a position I haven't occupied yet, in a photograph that documents something that hasn't happened yet but apparently will. The house is collecting my future now, storing it in boxes before I live it, preserving moments that haven't occurred in an attic that contains all of time compressed into a single space. And I know that eventually I'll go back to that Victorian, will climb those narrow stairs to the attic, will stand among the boxes containing my entire existence, and will let the house finish collecting me. Because that's what the photograph shows. That's what's stored in the box labeled with next week's date. That's my future, already collected and preserved, waiting in an attic for me to arrive and complete it. The house has been collecting me all along, piece by piece, moment by moment, taking everything I am and storing it away until nothing remains outside those boxes. And when I'm completely collected, when every item and memory and moment has been taken and stored, the house will label my final box with the date of my disappearance and stack it neatly with all the others. Another collection completed, another life fully preserved, another existence archived in an attic that will continue collecting long after I'm gone. The Victorian is still there, still waiting, still collecting. And next week, according to the photograph, I'll be there too. I was exploring an abandoned sanitarium in the Catskills, a 4-story brick building that had been closed since the 1960s, and the main staircase led me somewhere that shouldn't exist, a roof that was both exactly where it should be and impossibly far above the ground. The sanitarium had been built in the 1920s as a treatment facility for tuberculosis patients, one of those institutions that capitalized on the belief that mountain air and rest could cure the disease. It was a massive structure, red brick with white trim, built in a style that tried to balance medical functionality with aesthetic appeal to make patients feel less like they were in a hospital and more like they were at a resort. The building had been abandoned for over 50 years, left to decay after antibiotics made sanitariums obsolete. It sat on a hillside overlooking the valley, isolated enough that vandals and scavengers had mostly left it alone. The exterior showed the expected deterioration, broken windows, vegetation growing up the walls, sections of roof missing, but the structure was fundamentally sound. I'd gotten permission from the property owner to document it before it was demolished, and I'd been looking forward to exploring it for months. I entered through a side entrance that had been forced open by previous explorers, stepping into what had been a service corridor. The interior was in better condition than I'd expected given the building's age and abandonment. The floors were solid, the walls mostly intact, and many of the original features remained: built-in cabinets, vintage light fixtures, even some of the medical equipment still in place in examination rooms. I spent the first few hours on the ground floor, documenting the common areas, the kitchens, the administrative offices. The ground floor was laid out in a sensible grid, with wide hallways designed to accommodate beds being wheeled to and from patient rooms. Everything was on a grand scale: high ceilings, large windows, spacious rooms that were meant to feel airy and healing, rather than institutional and confining. Around midday, I moved to the upper floors. The main staircase was beautiful, a grand marble construction with an ornate wrought iron railing that curved elegantly as it ascended. It was the kind of staircase you'd expect in a hotel or mansion, not a medical facility, another example of the sanitarium's attempt to feel less clinical and more welcoming. I started climbing from the ground floor to the second floor, counting steps out of habit. 20 steps, which was standard for the floor-to-floor height of a building like this. I emerged into a second-floor hallway lined with patient rooms, each one small but well-appointed with large windows, designed to let in the healing mountain air. The layout was identical to the ground floor central hallway, rooms branching off on either side, everything symmetrical and orderly. I documented the second floor thoroughly, taking my time, and then headed to the third floor. The climb from second to third was identical to the first climb. 20 steps, same marble construction, same elegant railing. The third floor was another hallway of patient rooms, though these showed more water damage from the deteriorating roof above. I spent about an hour on the third floor, photographing rooms and documenting the building's condition, and then I started climbing toward what should have been the fourth and top floor. The first 20 steps were normal, same marble, same railing, the staircase curving as it had on the previous climbs. But after 20 steps, the stairs didn't end in a landing. They kept going. I assumed there was maybe a half floor or mezzanine level I hadn't known about, some architectural feature not mentioned in the building plans I'd reviewed. So I kept climbing. 30 steps, 40 steps. The staircase showed no signs of ending. The walls around me were unchanged, same marble, same iron railing, same dim light from my headlamp cutting through the dusty air. But I should have reached the fourth floor long ago. The ceiling height wasn't getting taller. Each step was the same height as the previous ones, the standard 7-inch rise you'd expect from a formal staircase. But there were far more steps than there should be. 50 steps, 60 steps. I was climbing the equivalent of 6 or 7 floors now, far more than the building's exterior suggested should exist. My legs were starting to burn from the exertion, but I kept climbing, compelled by confusion and curiosity to see where these stairs led. The architecture around me never changed. Same materials, same construction, same curved ascent. It was like walking on a treadmill designed to look like a staircase, moving vertically but never reaching a destination. At 70 steps, I finally emerged into open air, but I hadn't entered a hallway or another floor. I was on the roof. I stepped out onto the flat surface, covered in gravel and tar paper, and looked around. I was definitely on top of the sanitarium. I could see the surrounding mountains, the valley below, the roof's edge with its decorative brick parapet. This was the roof of the 4-story building I'd been exploring, but I'd climbed 70 steps to reach it. At 7 inches per step, that was over 40 feet of vertical ascent, far more than 3 floors should require. I should have climbed maybe 60 feet total from the ground floor to the roof of a 4-story building. But from the 3rd floor to the roof alone, I'd climbed over 40 feet. The math didn't work. The building wasn't tall enough to contain the distance I'd traveled. I walked to the edge of the roof and looked down. 4 stories to the ground, exactly as the building's exterior suggested. I could see the windows of each floor clearly: ground floor, 2nd floor, 3rd floor, and directly below me, the 4th floor windows. The building was exactly as tall as it should be, but the staircase had climbed far higher than that. I went back to the stairwell entrance and looked down. The stairs descended normally, curving back into the building, marble steps disappearing into shadow. I started descending, counting as I went. 20 steps, and I was on the 3rd floor. The normal distance, the expected count. The descent had taken the correct amount of vertical travel to reach the floor below. I climbed back up immediately, determined to verify what I'd experienced. Counted carefully, making sure I didn't lose track. 20 normal steps, then the stairs continued. 30 steps, 40 steps, 50 steps, 60 steps, 70 steps, and I was on the roof again. The same impossible climb, the same excessive vertical distance, the same arrival at a roof that should have been reached in 20 steps but required over 3 times that many. I descended and climbed 3 more times, counting carefully each time. The pattern was consistent. Descending from the roof to the 3rd floor took 20 steps. Ascending from the 3rd floor to the roof took anywhere from 65 to 75 steps, depending on how carefully I counted and whether I lost track. The distance up was far greater than the distance down, as if the building was taller when climbing than when descending. I went outside and measured the building from the ground. 4 stories, approximately 40 feet from ground to roofline. Each floor was roughly 10 feet ceiling height. From the 3rd floor to the roof should be 1 floor height, 10 feet, about 20 steps. But climbing that distance required 70 steps, which would be over 40 feet of vertical travel. The building wasn't tall enough to contain that distance, but the staircase climbed it anyway. I tried to find rational explanations. Maybe the steps were shallower on the climb up, requiring more of them to cover the same distance. But I measured the steps 7 inches, standard height, same going up as coming down. Maybe I was miscounting. Maybe the exertion of climbing was confusing my tracking. But I counted multiple times with the same result, and 70 steps is too large a number to miscount by the factor that would be required. Maybe the staircase was built with some kind of optical illusion, making it seem longer than it was. But I could see the stairs clearly, could verify they were actual physical steps, not some trick of perspective. I'd climbed 70 distinct marble steps, each one solid under my feet, each one requiring effort to ascend. I took photographs of the stairwell from various angles, documenting the climb. I set up my camera on the 3rd floor landing and took a long exposure as I climbed, creating a light trail from my headlamp that showed the path of my ascent. The photos confirmed what I'd experienced. The staircase extended far beyond where it should have ended, curving upward through space that the building's exterior didn't contain. I've been back to that sanitarium 4 times since that first visit, and each time I've climbed that staircase, and each time the result is the same. The climb from the 3rd floor to the roof takes approximately 70 steps, far more than the building's height should require. The descent takes 20 steps, exactly as expected. The asymmetry is consistent, measurable, verifiable. I've brought other explorers with me to witness it. Everyone experiences the same thing: normal descent, impossibly long ascent. We've tried climbing with our eyes closed, thinking maybe we're being fooled by visual cues. Same result. We've tried descending and immediately ascending without pausing, thinking maybe there's some reset that happens when you leave the stairwell. The climb is still 70 steps. I've researched the building's construction history, looking for any unusual architectural features that might explain what we're experiencing. Found nothing unusual in the original plans. The staircase was designed as a standard 4-floor ascent. Nothing remarkable about its construction or dimensions. I've consulted with architects and structural engineers, describing the phenomenon without revealing the location. They all say the same thing: it's impossible. Stairs can't be longer going up than coming down. Vertical distance is constant regardless of direction. But I have the documentation. I have step counts from multiple climbs, verified by multiple people. I have photographs showing the staircase extending beyond where the building's structure should end. I have measurements of the building's exterior, confirming it's only 4 stories tall. And I have the experience of climbing those 70 steps over and over, feeling the burn in my legs, counting each one, arriving at a roof that's exactly where it should be, but was reached through a journey that was far too long. I think the staircase is passing through folded space, somehow taking a longer path to reach the same destination. Like the building exists in normal 3-dimensional space from the outside, but the interior contains regions where space is compressed or extended, where the geometry doesn't match the exterior boundaries. The staircase climbs through one of these extended regions, covering far more vertical distance than the building should contain, but still arriving at the correct destination because space folds back on itself. Or maybe the staircase is climbing through time as well as space, each step taking slightly longer than it should, accumulating into a journey that feels normal in the moment but covers more distance than time should allow. Maybe I'm experiencing temporal dilation while climbing, moving through seconds that are stretched and extended, covering what feels like 70 steps worth of time while only ascending 20 steps worth of space. I don't know. What I do know is that building contains impossible geometry, that its staircase climbs far higher than its exterior suggests should be possible, and that the roof I reach after 70 steps is both exactly where it should be and impossibly high above the ground. I've stood on that roof after making the long climb and looked down at the ground 4 stories below, and I felt the disconnect between what I see and what I experienced. The building looks normal from up there 4 stories, standard height, nothing unusual. But I know I climbed the equivalent of 7 or 8 floors to reach it. Know that somewhere in that stairwell there's extra vertical space that exists inside the building but not outside it. And I've wondered what would happen if I kept climbing past the roof, if I didn't stop when I reached open air. Because sometimes, when I'm at the top of those 70 steps, standing on the roof, I see more stairs continuing upward. Faint, barely visible, like a ghostly continuation of the marble staircase rising into empty air above the building. I've never tried climbing them, never had the courage to step onto stairs that should lead into nothing. But they're there, or I think they're there, a suggestion of further ascent beyond the physical roof. Maybe those stairs lead to additional levels that exist only in whatever folded space the building contains. Maybe they climb higher and higher through dimensions that have no physical manifestation, reaching roofs that exist hundreds or thousands of feet above the actual building, in space that's accessible through the staircase but not through any other means. The sanitarium is still there, still standing in the Catskills, still scheduled for demolition. The staircase is still there too, still climbing far higher than it should, still leading to a roof through a journey that's 3 times longer than it needs to be. And somewhere in that stairwell, space is folded, or time is stretched, or reality is bent in ways that make the impossible climb feel normal until you count the steps and realize how far you've traveled. I don't know if demolishing the building will end the phenomenon or if the staircase will remain, climbing through space even after the structure that contains it is gone. I don't know if the extra vertical distance will persist, if the ruins will show evidence of the impossible height, or if everything will compress back to normal once the building is destroyed. But I know that as long as the sanitarium stands, the staircase will climb. And anyone who walks those stairs from the 3rd floor to the roof will take far more steps than they should, will climb far higher than the building contains, will arrive at a destination that's exactly where it's supposed to be, through a journey that shouldn't exist. And if they look carefully when they reach the roof, they might see those ghost stairs continuing upward into empty air, climbing toward roofs that exist in space the building doesn't occupy, leading to heights that can't be measured from the ground. They might see the suggestion of infinite ascent, of a staircase that never really ends but just keeps climbing through folded space forever. I've seen them. And sometimes I think about climbing them, about stepping off the physical roof onto those ghostly stairs and continuing upward, following them as far as they go, reaching heights that exist only in whatever impossible geometry the sanitarium contains. But I haven't done it yet, and I probably never will, because I'm afraid those stairs don't lead anywhere at all, that they just keep climbing forever through space that folds and stretches and extends infinitely, and anyone who starts ascending them will never reach another roof, never find another floor, never stop climbing until they're too exhausted to continue and fall backward through hundreds of feet of impossible vertical space. The staircase climbs. That's all I know for certain. It climbs far higher than it should, and somewhere in that climb, reality bends. An abandoned farmhouse in Iowa had a kitchen that still had food in it, and everything in that kitchen has remained perfectly fresh for 35 years, while the house around it slowly collapses into ruin. I found the property while doing a survey of abandoned structures in rural Iowa for a documentary project about America's declining farm communities. The farmhouse was one of hundreds that dot the landscape in that part of the state, two-story white clapboard, probably built in the 1920s, sitting in an overgrown yard surrounded by fields that had been sold off and incorporated into larger agricultural operations. The local historical society had records indicating the family the Hendersons had left suddenly in August 1989. No forwarding address, no explanation, just abandoned the property mid-harvest season and never came back. The bank had foreclosed, but the property had never sold. It sat empty for 35 years, too far from any town to be worth developing, too deteriorated to be worth renovating, just another dying farmhouse in a region full of them. I entered through the back door, which hung crooked on rusted hinges, stepping directly into the kitchen, and that's when I saw something that made me stop and stare, my brain refusing to process what my eyes were showing me. The kitchen table was set for breakfast. There was food on the table, a bowl of fruit, a loaf of bread, butter on a small plate, and on the counter, an open carton of milk, the kind with the fold-out spout that was common in the late 1980s. But this wasn't decades-old food in various states of decay. The apple in the fruit bowl was red and glossy. The bread looked soft, the crust golden brown, and the milk in that open carton was white and liquid, not dried up or rotted or separated into disgusting layers. It looked like someone had poured a glass from it that morning and left it sitting out. I approached the table slowly, convinced I was misunderstanding what I was seeing. Maybe this was recent food. Maybe someone was squatting in the house and had just stepped out. But the dust on the floor was undisturbed except for my footprints, and the dust on the table was thick except where the dishes and food sat. This food had been here a long time, long enough for dust to accumulate around it, but not long enough for any of it to show signs of age. I picked up the apple. It was firm, heavy, exactly like a fresh apple. I turned it over in my hands, examining it closely. No soft spots, no wrinkles, no signs of decay. The skin was smooth and unmarked. I squeezed it gently. It gave slightly, the way a crisp apple should, not at all like fruit that had been sitting out for 35 years. I set it down and examined the bread. I pressed my finger against it, and the bread compressed, springy and soft. I could smell it, that yeasty, slightly sweet smell of fresh bread. I opened the refrigerator, expecting to find it empty or full of rotted food. Instead, it was packed with groceries, all looking completely fresh. Packages of meat showing no freezer burn or discoloration. Vegetables still crisp and colorful. Dairy products that should have been disgusting pools of bacterial sludge decades ago, but instead looked like they'd been purchased yesterday. The power was off. I could see that the electrical panel in the basement had been disconnected, probably when the bank foreclosed on the property. The refrigerator hadn't been running for 35 years, but everything inside it was perfectly preserved. I took photographs of everything, documenting what I was seeing, because I knew no one would believe me otherwise. I carefully collected samples, a piece of bread, a small portion of the apple, a bit of cheese from the refrigerator. I sealed them in bags and dated them, planning to have them tested by someone who could tell me what was happening here. The rest of the house was decaying normally. The living room had peeling wallpaper and water damage from a leaking roof. The second floor showed extensive deterioration, with sagging floors and crumbling plaster. The basement had standing water and mold growing on the walls. Every part of the house except the kitchen, showed the expected signs of 35 years of abandonment, rot, decay, nature reclaiming what humans had left behind. But the kitchen was frozen in August 1989. Not literally frozen, not cold, but preserved in the exact state it had been when the Henderson family walked out for the last time. The clock on the wall had stopped at 7:23. The calendar showed the 15th of August, 1989. And the food on the table and in the refrigerator remained fresh, somehow protected from decay, held in perfect stasis while everything around it fell apart. I took my samples to a food science laboratory at the State University, telling them I'd found some preserved foods and wanted them analyzed. The results came back a week later, and the lab technician who called me sounded confused. The bread was fresh, baked within the past few days based on moisture content and starch analysis. The cheese showed no bacterial growth beyond what you'd expect from fresh dairy. The apple tissue was firm and vital, with no cellular breakdown. I went back to the farmhouse with better documentation equipment, cameras, temperature monitors, air quality sensors. I wanted to understand what was preserving that kitchen, what conditions were preventing decay, but the measurements showed nothing unusual. Room temperature, air, normal humidity, no unusual chemicals or radiation. Just a kitchen in an abandoned farmhouse containing food that should have rotted decades ago but somehow remained fresh. I started visiting regularly, documenting the kitchen over time. The same milk carton sat on the counter, the milk inside still liquid and white. I poured a small amount into a glass. It smelled normal, looked normal, even tasted normal when I worked up the courage to try a tiny sip. Fresh milk, indistinguishable from milk purchased that day, despite sitting in an open container in an unpowered refrigerator for 35 years. The same bread sat on the counter, soft and springy. The same fruit sat in the bowl, firm and fresh. I checked every time I visited, weekly at first, then monthly as the pattern became clear. Nothing aged, nothing changed. The food remained in the exact state it had been in August 1989, while the house around it continued to deteriorate. I decided to run an experiment. I brought fresh food with me on one visit, a banana and a sandwich I'd made that morning. I placed them on the kitchen counter next to the preserved food and left. I also left identical items in my car as controls. When I returned a week later, the food in my car had rotted. As expected, the banana was brown and soft. The sandwich was growing mold. But the food I'd left on the kitchen counter was unchanged. The banana was still yellow and firm. The sandwich looked freshly made. The kitchen was preserving everything inside it. Not just the food from 1989, but anything new that was brought in. The space itself had some property that prevented decay, that held everything within it in perfect stasis, regardless of when it had been placed there. I left the banana and sandwich on the counter and continued to check on them over the following months. They never changed. The banana remained yellow, the bread remained soft, the lettuce stayed crisp. Meanwhile, the house continued to fall apart. More of the roof collapsed, water damage spread, windows broke, but the kitchen and everything in it remained perfectly preserved. I researched the Henderson family, trying to understand what had happened here. Found very little. They'd been a typical farm family, parents and 3 children, owned the property for 2 generations, nothing unusual in any records. The disappearance had been noted by neighbors when they didn't show up for church, and their livestock wasn't being tended, but no missing persons investigation had turned up anything. They just left, taking nothing, leaving behind a kitchen full of food and a house that would slowly crumble, while that food remained fresh forever. I found one interesting detail in old newspaper archives. The week before the Hendersons disappeared, there had been a minor earthquake in the area. Unusual for Iowa, rare enough to be noteworthy. The epicenter had been very close to the Henderson farmhouse. I wondered if the earthquake had done something to the property, had created some geological or physical anomaly that preserved the kitchen. But that didn't explain the precision of the effect. The preservation was limited exactly to the kitchen. The doorway between the kitchen and the dining room was a perfect boundary. Food on the kitchen side remained fresh. Food placed on the dining room side decayed normally. The effect didn't extend to the basement below the kitchen or the bedroom above it, just the kitchen itself. The exact boundaries of that single room preserved everything while the rest of the house deteriorated. I've been documenting that kitchen for over 2 years now. I visit monthly, photograph everything, note any changes. There are never any changes. The milk from the 15th of August 1989 is still fresh. The bread is still soft. The apple is still crisp. And the banana and sandwich I left there over 2 years ago are still exactly as fresh as the day I made them. I've brought other researchers to see it. Food scientists, physicists, preservation experts. Everyone agrees it's impossible, but no one can explain it. We've taken samples repeatedly. The food always tests as fresh, shows no signs of age, contains no unusual preservatives or chemicals. It's just regular food that somehow stopped aging the moment it entered that kitchen. I've tried to understand what the Hendersons did in that kitchen, what might have created this effect. I've searched the room thoroughly, looking for hidden technology or unusual construction materials. Found nothing exceptional. Just a standard 1920s farmhouse kitchen with 1980s updates, linoleum floors, formica counters, standard appliances. Nothing that would explain the perfect preservation. I've wondered if the Hendersons discovered the preservation effect and left because of it. Maybe they realized something was wrong with their kitchen, that food wasn't decaying the way it should, and they fled in fear or confusion. Or maybe they didn't notice. Maybe the effect started after they left, triggered by their departure, or by whatever event caused them to abandon their home. I've also wondered if the preservation extends to things other than food. I've left other items in the kitchen: flowers, which should wilt within days but remain fresh; newspaper, which should yellow and become brittle but stays crisp and white; even a small plant, which should die without proper care but continues to look healthy despite never being watered. Everything in that kitchen is frozen in time, held in the exact state it was in when it crossed the threshold. Not frozen in the sense of being cold or static, but frozen in the sense of being protected from decay, from entropy, from the normal progression of deterioration that affects everything in the physical world. I've started to feel strange after spending time in that kitchen. Nothing dramatic, but subtle effects that I can't quite pin down. I feel younger somehow after a visit, more energetic, less affected by the minor aches and pains that come with age. A scar on my hand seems to be fading. A pulled muscle I'd been dealing with healed faster than it should have. I think the kitchen isn't just preserving food and objects. I think it's preserving anything that stays in it long enough, including people. I think if I spent enough time in that room, I'd stop aging too, would be held in whatever state I was in when I entered, protected from time and decay, the same way the milk and bread are protected. But I don't stay long on my visits. I document, I observe, I run my tests, and then I leave. Because I'm afraid of what would happen if I stayed too long. Afraid that the preservation effect would take hold, that I'd become stuck in that moment, unable to age or change or progress, trapped in a permanent state like the food on the counter, fresh forever, but also frozen forever. The farmhouse is scheduled for demolition next year. The county has finally decided to clear the property, to remove the unsafe structure, and return the land to agricultural use. I've tried to explain what's in that kitchen, tried to convince authorities to preserve it for study, but no one believes me, or they think I'm exaggerating what's clearly just some quirk of preservation conditions. I don't know what will happen when they demolish the house. Will the kitchen's preservation effect persist even after the structure is destroyed? Will the food remain fresh in the rubble? Or will everything that's been preserved for 35 years suddenly decay all at once? 35 years of entropy catching up in an instant. I plan to be there when they tear it down. I want to see what happens to that milk, to that bread, to that apple. I want to know if the preservation is tied to the physical space of the kitchen, or if it's tied to the objects themselves, if it will persist, or if it will end when the walls come down. But part of me hopes they don't demolish it. Part of me wants that kitchen to stand forever, a room where time has stopped, where nothing ages or changes or dies. A place where food from 1989 remains fresh alongside food from this year, all of it preserved perfectly, all of it protected from the decay that claims everything else. Because if that kitchen can preserve food indefinitely, if it can stop aging and prevent entropy, then maybe it proves that decay isn't inevitable. Maybe it shows that time can be stopped, that the progression toward deterioration can be halted, that permanence is possible even in a world where everything eventually falls apart. The kitchen is still there, still fresh, still frozen in August 1989. And everything I've left there, the banana, the sandwich, the flowers, the newspaper, remains unchanged, perfect, eternal, protected by something I don't understand, in a space where the normal rules don't apply. And sometimes I think about the Henderson family, about whether they're still out there somewhere, still the same age they were in 1989, whether they took the preservation effect with them when they left, whether they've spent 35 years not aging, not changing, held in permanent stasis by whatever force protects their kitchen, or whether they came back, walked into that kitchen one final time, and never left. Whether they're still there somehow, preserved along with their groceries, frozen in a moment from 1989 that never ended, standing in a kitchen where time stopped and nothing ever decays. I was documenting an abandoned school in rural Pennsylvania, a single-story building shaped like a long rectangle, and the main hallway inside that building is twice as long as the building itself, extending through space that physically doesn't exist. The school had been closed in 2003, when the district consolidated and built a new facility closer to town. It sat empty for over 20 years, a victim of rural depopulation and the economics of maintaining old buildings in areas where property values couldn't justify the investment. The structure was simple, a long rectangular building constructed in the 1950s, typical of the utilitarian school architecture from that era. Single-story, flat roof, brick exterior, designed for efficiency rather than aesthetics. From the outside, it looked completely ordinary, just another abandoned rural school slowly succumbing to weather and neglect. I'd gotten permission from the school district to document the building before it was demolished, and I arrived on a gray October morning with my measuring tools and camera equipment. I started with the exterior, taking measurements and photographs to establish baseline documentation. The building was straightforward to measure: 200 feet long from end to end, 40 feet wide from front to back. I measured multiple times to be certain, using both a measuring tape and a laser distance finder. 200 feet long, consistently, verified from multiple positions. I noted the layout from outside: a central entrance at one end, windows indicating classrooms along both sides, an exit door at the far end. Simple linear design, everything visible and accountable from the exterior. I estimated maybe 8 or 10 classrooms based on the window spacing, which matched what the school district records indicated. Nothing unusual, nothing that suggested what I'd find inside. I entered through the main entrance and found myself in a short entrance hall that opened into the main hallway. The hallway ran the length of the building, straight and unadorned, with classroom doors on both sides and exit signs visible at the far end. Standard institutional construction, linoleum floors, painted cinder block walls, fluorescent light fixtures hanging dark and useless from the ceiling. I started walking down the hallway, intending to do a quick initial survey before beginning detailed documentation. The hallway stretched ahead of me, and I started walking at my normal pace, expecting to reach the far end in maybe a minute or two. But I kept walking, and the hallway kept extending ahead of me, the far end never seeming to get closer. After what felt like several minutes, I stopped and checked my watch. I'd been walking for over 5 minutes at a steady pace, probably close to a quarter mile, based on normal walking speed, but the building was only 200 feet long. I should have reached the end long ago. I turned and looked back. The entrance I'd come through was barely visible in the distance, far behind me. I looked forward. The exit at the far end still looked distant, still not noticeably closer, despite minutes of walking. Something was fundamentally wrong with the scale of this hallway. I decided to pace it off properly, to count my steps and calculate the actual distance. I went back to the entrance and started over, counting each step. My stride is roughly 3 feet, so I could estimate distance fairly accurately by step count. I walked the hallway again, counting carefully, and reached the far end after 140 steps. 420 feet, give or take, more than double the building's exterior length. I went back outside immediately and measured the building again, thinking I must have made an error the first time, but the measurement was the same: 200 feet from end to end. I could see both ends of the building from where I stood. There was no way this structure contained a 420-foot hallway. The math didn't work, the space didn't exist. I went back inside and walked the hallway again. Same result: 140 steps, over 400 feet of interior distance. I checked the classrooms branching off the hallway, thinking maybe they were extending the interior in some way I wasn't accounting for. But the classrooms were normal sizes, maybe 30 feet by 30 feet, matching the 40-foot width of the building. The impossibility was isolated to the hallway itself. I marked the halfway point of the interior hallway, 70 steps from the entrance, 210 feet, with a piece of tape on the wall. Then I went outside and tried to find the corresponding location on the exterior. At 210 feet from the entrance, I should be at the far end of the building, or even past it, since the building was only 200 feet long. But when I measured 210 feet along the exterior wall, I was only about halfway down the building's length. The building continued for another 100 feet beyond the point that should correspond to the interior hallway's midpoint. I stood there trying to make sense of it. The building was 200 feet long from outside. The hallway was 420 feet long from inside. Somehow, the interior space was more than twice the size of the exterior container. The building was bigger on the inside than the outside, violating basic geometry and physical law. I called a colleague, another urban explorer named Marcus, who had experience with unusual architectural features. I described what I was finding, and he drove out to verify it. We measured together, both of us taking independent counts to make sure neither of us was making errors. The results were consistent: 200 feet exterior, 420 feet interior. Marcus paced the hallway while I remained outside, and we stayed in contact via radio. When he reached what he calculated was the midpoint of the interior hallway, I was standing at what should be the corresponding point on the exterior. He was inside the building at a location I calculated to be 100 feet past where the building ended. But when he looked out the window, he could see me standing on the exterior wall right where he expected me to be. We tried to understand the geometry. If the hallway was twice as long as the building, where was the extra space? We examined the walls carefully, looking for hidden rooms or voids that might account for the discrepancy. Found nothing. The walls were standard construction cinder block on the interior, brick on the exterior, with insulation and air gaps between. No hidden spaces, no unusual construction. We decided to drill through the wall to see what we'd find. We marked a spot on the interior hallway and drilled outward, expecting to encounter something unusual: extra space, different materials, something that would explain the impossible length. But the drill bit passed through normal wall construction and emerged on the exterior exactly where we expected it to, based on the exterior measurements. We could see the drill bit poking through the exterior brick, could verify its position relative to the building's dimensions. But inside, that drill hole was located in a section of hallway that should have been 100 feet beyond where the building ended. The interior and exterior didn't match, couldn't match, but somehow both existed simultaneously in the same physical location. We tried walking the hallway at different speeds, thinking maybe time dilation was involved, that perhaps time passed differently inside the hallway, and we were experiencing more subjective time than objective time. But our watches matched when we compared them. No time had been lost or gained. The walk just covered more physical distance than should be possible. We brought in other explorers to verify our measurements. Everyone who walked that hallway got the same result, approximately 420 feet of interior distance. Consistently, repeatedly, everyone who measured the exterior got 200 feet. The discrepancy was real, measurable, and consistent. We set up cameras at both ends of the hallway and in the middle, recording as someone walked the length. The video showed a normal walk down a normal hallway, taking the several minutes it should take to walk 400 feet. But reviewing the footage from different camera positions showed something impossible: the walker passing the midpoint camera when they should have already exited the building based on exterior measurements. The cameras captured the extended journey that the exterior dimensions said couldn't exist. I researched the school's construction history, looking for any unusual features or experimental architecture that might explain what we were seeing. Found nothing unusual in the records. Standard 1950s school construction, built by a local contractor using conventional methods and materials. No indication of any architectural innovation or experimental design. I looked into the land the school was built on, thinking maybe there was something geological or historical that might be relevant. The area was unremarkable farmland that had been purchased by the school district in the 1940s. No history of unusual events or geological features, just flat Pennsylvania countryside, nothing that would suggest spatial anomalies. We've documented this phenomenon extensively now. We've brought surveyors with professional equipment to verify the measurements. We've used laser distance finders, measuring tapes, GPS coordinates, and step counts. Every method confirms the same discrepancy. The hallway is twice as long on the inside as the building is on the outside. We've tried to find the boundaries of the effect. The classrooms branching off the hallway are normal size and match the building's exterior dimensions. The entrance hall is normal, the exit area is normal. Only the main hallway exhibits the extended space, and only when walking along its length. If you enter a classroom halfway down the hallway and then exit back into the hallway, you're still in that impossibly extended space, still experiencing the double distance. I think the hallway exists partially in folded space, like the building somehow overlaps with itself or with an adjacent dimension. The interior space is compressed or folded in a way that allows it to be longer than its container without extending beyond the building's boundaries. Like the hallway is somehow looped or doubled back on itself in a dimension we can't perceive directly, creating extra distance that has to be walked despite not occupying additional physical space in our normal 3 dimensions. Or maybe the building exists simultaneously in 2 slightly different spatial configurations, and the hallway is where those configurations overlap, creating a space that partakes of both sets of dimensions. Walking the hallway, you traverse both configurations sequentially, covering the distance from both versions, even though only one is visible from the outside. I've wondered what would happen if you tried to walk through the walls of the hallway, to cut perpendicular across the extended space, instead of following it linearly. We've walked into classrooms, and then tried to navigate to corresponding positions by going through internal walls. But the geometry doesn't work. The classrooms connect to the hallway at points that make sense from inside but that don't align with the exterior measurements. You can't shortcut the extended distance by going around it because the space itself is fundamentally altered, not just stretched. We've measured the hallway at different times of day, in different weather conditions, with different numbers of people present, trying to find variables that might affect the discrepancy, but it's consistent. Always the same ratio, interior hallway approximately twice as long as exterior building. The extended space is stable, permanent, unchanging. The school is still scheduled for demolition, though we've tried to convince authorities to preserve it for study. But explaining that a hallway is twice as long as the building it's in doesn't translate well to official reports, and no one with decision-making authority wants to investigate what sounds like either a measurement error or a complete fabrication. I don't know what will happen when they demolish it. Will the extended space collapse when the building is destroyed? Will the extra 200 feet of hallway have to go somewhere, manifest somehow in the physical world when its container is removed? Or will everything compress back to normal dimensions, the impossible space vanishing when the structure that contains it is gone? I've walked that hallway dozens of times now, and I've never gotten used to the wrongness of it. Every time, there's that moment when you realize you've been walking too long, that you should have reached the end already, that the distance is impossible. And every time, the far end remains distant, the hallway stretching ahead far beyond where the building's exterior says it should end. I think about the students who attended this school, who walked this hallway every day for decades. Did they notice? Did they realize they were walking twice as far as they should be every time they went from one end of the building to the other? Or did the familiarity of daily routine blind them to the impossibility, the same way people adapt to any environment and stop noticing its unusual features? I think about the teachers who worked here, who must have walked this hallway thousands of times. Did any of them measure it, verify the dimensions, realize that their workplace violated basic geometry? Or did they simply accept it, file it away as one of those quirks that old buildings have, not worth investigating or questioning? The school is still there, still standing in rural Pennsylvania, still containing a hallway that's longer than the building itself, still offering anyone who enters it the chance to walk through space that shouldn't exist. And when you walk that hallway, when you count the steps and realize you're covering 400 feet inside a 200-foot building, you have to accept that space isn't as stable or predictable as we assume. That buildings can be bigger inside than outside. That distances can change depending on whether you're measuring from inside or outside. That the geometry we take for granted isn't always reliable. The hallway extends. That's all I know for certain. It extends far beyond the building's boundaries, reaches into space that the exterior dimensions say doesn't exist, and takes you on a journey that's twice as long as it should be. And somewhere in that hallway, between the entrance and the exit, you're walking through folded space, through dimensions that overlap, through geometry that refuses to behave the way physics says it must. And maybe that's true of other buildings too. Maybe there are schools and offices and homes all over the world with hallways that are longer than they should be, with rooms that contain more space than their walls should allow, with staircases that climb higher than the building's height. Maybe we just don't notice, because we don't measure, don't verify, don't question the distances we walk every day. But I've measured this one, and I know it's wrong. And every time I walk it, I'm traveling through space that isn't there, covering distance that doesn't exist, moving through a building that's bigger on the inside than the outside, in ways that make no sense but that remain absolutely, measurably, undeniably real. An abandoned boarding house in New Orleans had a second-floor bedroom that urban explorers avoided, though nobody could articulate exactly why, and I've now lived the same week 4 times because every time I fall asleep in that room, I wake up yesterday. The boarding house was one of those grand old structures in the Garden District, built in the 1890s when New Orleans was booming and wealthy Northerners came south for the winter season. It had been a boarding house since the 1920s, operating continuously until Hurricane Katrina flooded the ground floor in 2005. The owner had died before repairs could be made, and the building had sat empty for nearly 20 years, slowly deteriorating in the humid Louisiana climate. I'd been documenting abandoned buildings across the South for a photography project, and the boarding house had been recommended by several local explorers as having exceptional period details still intact. The exterior was classic New Orleans architecture, tall windows, wrought iron balconies, elaborate trim work, all of it weathered and peeling but still beautiful. I entered through a side door that previous explorers had forced open, stepping into an entrance hall with a grand staircase curving up to the second floor. The ground floor showed severe flood damage water lines visible 4 feet up the walls, warped floorboards, mold growing in dark patches. But the second floor was in better condition, largely untouched by the flood, still showing the boarding house as it had been when people lived there. I started documenting the second floor rooms, photographing the period furniture and architectural details. Most of the rooms were unremarkable bedrooms with old iron bedsteads, dressers, peeling wallpaper showing faded floral patterns. But when I reached the room at the end of the hall, I felt an immediate reluctance to enter. Nothing about the room looked different from the others. Nothing obviously wrong or disturbing. Just a standard bedroom with a bed, a dresser, a window overlooking the street. But I didn't want to go in, couldn't quite articulate why. I forced myself to enter anyway, dismissing the feeling as just the usual unease that comes with exploring abandoned places. I photographed the room from various angles, documented the furniture and fixtures, and then sat on the bed to rest for a moment. The mattress was old but surprisingly intact, still retaining some of its original firmness. I'd been exploring for hours, and my feet were tired, so I leaned back against the headboard, intending to rest for just a few minutes before continuing my documentation. I must have dozed off, though I don't remember feeling particularly drowsy. I just closed my eyes for what felt like a moment, and when I opened them again, the light coming through the window looked different earlier somehow, the angle suggesting late morning instead of mid-afternoon. I checked my phone to see how long I'd been asleep, and my stomach dropped when I saw the date, October 14th. Yesterday, I'd entered the boarding house on October 15th, had taken dozens of photos that morning, had been documenting the second floor for hours. But my phone insisted it was October 14th. I thought it was a glitch, some error with the phone's internal clock. But when I checked my photo gallery, all the images I'd taken that morning were gone. My photos ended with images from October 14th pictures I remembered taking the day before at a different location. The entire day of October 15th had vanished from my phone as completely as if it had never happened. I left the boarding house in confusion, trying to make sense of what I was experiencing. I called my girlfriend Sarah, thinking she could confirm what day it actually was. She answered on the second ring, and before I could say anything, she said, "Why are you calling me again? We literally just hung up an hour ago." I was confused. "What do you mean? I haven't talked to you since yesterday." "We talked an hour ago," she insisted. "You called me from that boarding house to tell me about the weird feeling you got from one of the rooms. Are you okay? You sound disoriented." I remembered that conversation. I'd called her yesterday, or what I thought was yesterday, from the boarding house to describe my reluctance to enter the end bedroom, but that had been October 14th. Today was supposed to be October 15th, a day I'd already lived, a day that had now apparently disappeared or been erased or been reset somehow. I checked other sources. News websites showed October 14th. My email showed messages from October 14th. My calendar said October 14th. According to every external verification I could find, it was October 14th, and I'd somehow lost October 15th, or traveled back 24 hours, or experienced something that had reset my timeline. I went home and tried to make sense of it. I compared my memories of October 15th with what was happening now on October 14th. Everything matched. The weather was the same, the news was the same. Sarah's conversation with me followed the same pattern I remembered from what I thought was yesterday. I was living October 14th again, reliving a day I'd already experienced. I couldn't let it go. I needed to verify what had happened, needed to understand if falling asleep in that bedroom had really caused me to travel back in time. So the next morning, October 15th again, or for the second time, I went back to the boarding house. I walked up to the second floor, down the hall to the end bedroom, and I entered it with deliberate intent. The room looked exactly as it had before, or as I remembered it looking the first time I'd entered it. I sat on the bed, determined to stay awake this time, to resist the drowsiness, to maintain consciousness and see if the temporal displacement happened while I was aware of it. But almost immediately, I felt overwhelmingly tired. My eyes grew heavy, my thoughts became fuzzy, and despite my determination to stay awake, I felt myself slipping into sleep. I fought it, tried to force my eyes open, tried to stand up from the bed, but the drowsiness was irresistible, pulling me down like a weight, and within minutes I was unconscious. When I woke up, the light through the window was wrong again. I checked my phone immediately, already knowing what I'd find. October 14th, I'd gone back again, lost another day, returned to the same starting point. I was now living October 14th for the third time, caught in a loop that reset every time I fell asleep in that bedroom. I've tested this repeatedly now, and the pattern is consistent. Every time I fall asleep in that bedroom, I wake up 24 hours earlier than when I lost consciousness. The reset is precise. I always wake up at the same time of day I fell asleep, but one day earlier. If I fall asleep at 2 p.m. on October 15th, I wake up at 2 p.m. on October 14th. I've tried to stay awake in the room, tried every method I can think of to resist the drowsiness. I've consumed massive amounts of caffeine before entering. I've had friends try to keep me awake. I've set alarms, pinched myself, even slapped myself trying to maintain consciousness. But the sleep is unavoidable. Within minutes of sitting or lying on that bed, I become overwhelmingly drowsy, and no amount of willpower or external stimulation can keep me awake. The longest I've managed to stay conscious in that room is maybe 15 minutes, and even that required incredible effort. And when I finally succumbed to sleep, when I woke up, I'd gone back a day again. October 13th this time, having lost both October 14th and October 15th, living days I'd already experienced 2 and 3 times before. I've been doing this for what feels like weeks now, but in objective calendar time, it's only been a few days. I keep going back to that bedroom, keep falling asleep, keep waking up further in the past. I've lived the same 5-day period 4 times now, experiencing October 11th through October 15th repeatedly. Each time returning to the bedroom, each time falling asleep despite my determination not to, each time waking up in an earlier version of the week. I've started to notice patterns in the repeated days. Conversations I have with people follow the same script unless I deliberately change my behavior. Weather events happen at the same times. News stories break at the same moments. The days are identical each time I live them, like I'm watching a recording play over and over, except I'm inside the recording and I can interact with it, change small details, but can't escape the overall loop. Sarah has noticed something's wrong. I've had the same conversation with her 5 times now, the one where I call her from the boarding house to describe the weird feeling I get from the end bedroom. Each time, I've tried to explain that I'm living the same days repeatedly, that I'm stuck in some kind of temporal loop. Each time, she thinks I'm joking or stressed or having some kind of psychological episode. And each time, when I go back to the bedroom and fall asleep and wake up earlier, she has no memory of our previous conversation, because from her perspective, it hasn't happened yet. I've tried to break the loop by not returning to the boarding house, by refusing to enter that bedroom, by staying away and living through the days normally. But I can't resist. The compulsion to go back is overwhelming, stronger each time, like the room is calling me back, demanding that I return and sleep and travel further backward through time. I've started to document everything meticulously, writing down what happens each day, noting the differences in my behavior, tracking how far back I've gone. I'm currently on October 9th, having lost a week of calendar time, having lived the same 7 days multiple times through various combinations as I've traveled backward. I've noticed that my memories are starting to blur. I remember having the same conversations multiple times, remember making the same decisions, remember experiencing the same events, but I can't always keep track of which iteration I'm on. Sometimes I respond to Sarah as if we've already discussed something, only to realize this is the first time from her perspective, and I'm referencing a conversation that won't happen for days. I've also noticed that the further back I go, the harder it becomes to remember my life before the loop started. My memories of October 10th and earlier are becoming fuzzy, less distinct, as if the repeated days are overriding my original experiences of those dates. I can remember the first time I lived October 11th, but barely, and only because I've been writing everything down. I'm afraid of what will happen if I keep going back. I've traveled backwards 7 days now, and each day I return to that bedroom, fall asleep despite my resistance, and wake up 24 hours earlier. At this rate, I'll reach October 1st within a few days, then late September, then progressively further into the past. But I'm more afraid of what happens when I reach a significant day, a day where something important happened that I can't change or avoid. I'm afraid I'll reach a day where I made a crucial decision or experienced a significant event, and I'll be forced to relive it over and over, unable to escape that particular 24-hour period, because something about it creates a barrier the loop can't pass through. I think the bedroom is pulling me backward through time towards some specific moment, some day that the room wants me to reach, and once I get there, I'll be stuck, living that single day forever, resetting every time I fall asleep, unable to move forward or backward, just circling through the same 24 hours infinitely. I've researched the boarding house's history, looking for clues about why this bedroom has this effect. Found very little that's useful. The building has been a boarding house for over a century, with hundreds of people living there temporarily over the years. No records of anyone disappearing or experiencing temporal anomalies. Nothing that would explain a room that sends you back in time when you sleep in it. But I did find one interesting detail. In 1924, a man named Thomas Brennan lived in that specific room for 3 months. According to boarding house records, he paid his rent on time, caused no problems, and then one day in October 1924, he simply wasn't there anymore. His belongings remained in the room, his rent was paid through the end of the month, but he vanished without explanation. The boarding house owner kept his room reserved for him for weeks, thinking he'd return, but he never did. I wonder if Thomas Brennan discovered what the room does. If he fell asleep one night and woke up the previous day, and then kept going back, kept falling asleep and waking up earlier and earlier, traveling backward through October 1924 towards some moment he couldn't escape. I wonder if he's still there somehow, still sleeping in that room, still waking up yesterday, caught in an infinite loop that's been running for 100 years. I think I'm following the same path Thomas Brennan took. I think the room is pulling me backward through October 2024, the same way it pulled him backward through October 1924. And I think when I reach whatever day the loop is centered on, whatever moment created this temporal distortion, I'll be trapped there the same way he was, living the same day over and over until I become part of the room's history, another person who slept there once and disappeared into the past. I'm on October 7th now. I've been traveling backward for 8 days of calendar time, living the same 2 weeks over and over in various combinations. I know I should stop going back to that bedroom, should resist the compulsion, should break the cycle before I get so far back that I can't find my way forward again. But I can't stop. Every day, I return to the boarding house, climb the stairs to the second floor, walk down the hall to the end bedroom, and sit on that bed. And every time, despite my determination to stay awake, despite my fear of where this is leading, I fall asleep within minutes. And when I wake up, it's yesterday again, and I've lost another day, traveled another 24 hours into the past. I'm writing this on October 7th, but I know tomorrow will be October 6th, and the day after will be October 5th, and I'll keep traveling backward until I reach whatever day the loop wants me to reach. And once I'm there, I don't think I'll be able to leave. I think I'll be stuck living the same day forever, waking up yesterday over and over, sleeping and resetting and waking up to the same morning again and again. The bedroom is still there, on the second floor of that abandoned boarding house in New Orleans. And if you ever explore that building, if you reach the end of the second floor hallway and find that room, don't go in. Don't sit on the bed. Don't let the drowsiness take you, because if you fall asleep there, you'll wake up yesterday, and you might not be able to find your way back to today. You might just keep going backward, losing days, living the same time over and over, until you reach a moment you can't escape and become another person who disappeared in October, another name in the boarding house's records, who vanished without explanation. I can feel the pull even now, sitting here writing this on October 7th, knowing that in a few hours I'll return to that room, knowing that I'll fall asleep despite everything I've learned, knowing that when I wake up it will be October 6th and I'll have lost another day. The loop continues. It always continues. And somewhere in the past I'm traveling toward, there's a day that's waiting for me, a day I'll reach and never leave, a day that will become my entire existence, lived over and over forever. I wonder what day it is. I wonder what happened there that created this temporal trap. And I wonder if Thomas Brennan is still living his day from October 1924, still waking up yesterday, still trapped in the same loop I'm falling into, both of us circling through time in that room where yesterday never ends. I was exploring an abandoned Victorian in Savannah that had belonged to the same family for 4 generations before being abandoned in 2003, and the house remembered everyone who had ever lived there, playing back their lives simultaneously like overlapping recordings, and now it's added me to its collection of memories. The Victorian was one of those grand Savannah houses in the historic district, built in 1887 by a cotton merchant who'd made his fortune in the post-Reconstruction economy. It had stayed in the same family, the Ashfords, for over a century, passing from generation to generation until the last heir died childless in 2003. The estate had been tied up in legal complications for 2 decades, probate issues and disputed claims from distant relatives, and the house had sat empty all that time, perfectly preserved because no one could legally sell or occupy it. I'd gotten permission from the court-appointed estate manager to document it before the legal issues were finally resolved, and the property could be sold. The exterior was pristine, or as pristine as a house could be after 20 years of minimal maintenance. Classic Savannah Victorian architecture. 3 stories of brick with elaborate gingerbread trim, a wraparound porch with ornate columns, tall windows with original wavy glass. The interior was even more impressive. The Ashfords had apparently walked away from everything, leaving the house fully furnished, personal items still in place, as if they just stepped out and planned to return. I entered through the front door, stepping into an entrance hall with a grand staircase and period furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, but beneath that dust the house was remarkably intact. Furniture still arranged in living spaces, books still on shelves, photographs still on walls, dishes still in cabinets. It was like the house had been frozen in 2003, preserved exactly as it had been the day the last Ashford died. I started documenting the ground floor, photographing the parlor, the dining room, the library. The furniture was Victorian era, heavy dark wood pieces that had probably been in the house since it was built. But mixed in were items from later periods, a 1950s radio, a 1970s television, modern books and magazines from the early 2000s. The accumulation of generations, all coexisting in the same space. As I worked, I started to notice movement in my peripheral vision. Nothing obvious, nothing I could see when I looked directly at it, just the suggestion of someone moving in the next room, shadows shifting in ways that didn't match the light coming through the windows. I dismissed it as the usual feeling you get in old houses, that sense of presence that comes from being alone in spaces that were once full of life. But then I started hearing voices, faint at first, barely audible, like conversations happening in distant rooms. I couldn't make out words, just the cadence of speech, the rise and fall of people talking to each other. I followed the sounds, thinking maybe there was a radio still running somewhere, some device that had been left on and was still playing after 20 years. But the sounds moved as I moved, always staying just out of clear hearing range, always in the next room or the floor above. I was in the parlor, photographing a portrait of a stern-looking woman from what looked like the 1890s, when I saw them clearly for the first time. People sitting in the chairs around me, talking to each other, their forms barely visible like images projected onto smoke or mist. I could see through them, could see the furniture beneath and behind them, but they were definitely their figures in period clothing, moving and gesturing and speaking in voices I could almost hear. I stood very still and watched. There were 5 or 6 of them, and they seemed unaware of my presence. They were having a conversation, something about a business matter, their clothing suggesting the 1920s. I could see a man in a 3-piece suit gesturing emphatically, a woman in a long dress responding, others listening and occasionally interjecting. The scene was playing out in front of me like a film projected into the room, except there was no projector, no screen, just translucent figures occupying the same space I was standing in. Then I noticed others, different figures from different time periods, occupying the same room simultaneously. A woman in 1950s clothing, sitting in a chair that was already occupied by someone from the 1920s, the 2 figures overlapping, both unaware of each other. A child running through the room in what looked like 1970s clothes, passing directly through an older couple, having a conversation in Victorian-era formal wear. The house was showing me its history, not as a sequence, not one era at a time, but all at once. Every person who'd ever lived here, every conversation that had happened in this room, every moment the house had witnessed, all of it playing back simultaneously, layered on top of each other, decades compressed into a single moment. I realized the voices I'd been hearing weren't coming from different rooms. They were all in the same room, just separated by time. Conversations from the 1890s overlapping with arguments from the 1960s, laughter from the 1930s mixing with crying from the 1990s. The house had recorded everything, had kept every sound and image, and was now playing it all back at once. The longer I stood there, the clearer the figures became. I started to distinguish individual features, started to hear specific words in the overlapping conversations. I watched a birthday party from what looked like the 1940s happening in one corner of the room, while a funeral reception from the 1980s occupied another corner, both events real and present, but separated by decades, both preserved in the house's memory and replayed simultaneously. I moved through the ground floor, and in every room I found the same phenomenon. The dining room showed dozens of family meals from different eras, all happening at once. The table occupied by multiple groups of diners from different decades, all sitting in the same chairs, all eating different meals, all unaware of the others. The library showed generations of Ashfords reading by lamplight or electric light, some in Victorian-era clothing, some in modern casual wear, all engaged in their private reading moments, all sharing the same space across a century of time. I climbed to the 2nd floor, where the bedrooms were located. In what had clearly been the master bedroom, I saw the room occupied by different couples from different generations, all living their private lives simultaneously. I watched a woman from the 1920s getting dressed in front of a mirror, while a couple from the 1960s slept in the same bed, their forms translucent and overlapping, neither aware of the other's existence. The house was showing me intimacy, privacy, the moments people thought were theirs alone. But the house had been watching, had been recording, had been preserving every moment, and now all those private moments were being played back simultaneously, generations of Ashfords living their lives on top of each other in the same rooms. I found myself becoming part of the memory. In one of the bedrooms, I saw a translucent version of myself examining the same dresser I was currently looking at, but the translucent version was about 30 seconds behind my actual movements. I raised my hand, and 30 seconds later the translucent version raised its hand. I turned my head, and half a minute later my ghost self turned its head in the exact same way. The house had already recorded me. I'd been in the building for less than an hour, but the house had captured my presence, had added me to its collection of memories, and was already playing me back alongside all the other people who'd ever walked these rooms. I was becoming part of the permanent record, my movements and actions being preserved and replayed even while I was still performing them. I went to the 3rd floor, where the children's bedrooms and servants' quarters had been. These rooms were more crowded with memories, generations of children growing up in the same spaces, their play and sleep and private moments all overlapping, all preserved, all replayed simultaneously. I watched a girl from the 1890s, playing with a doll in the same corner, where a boy from the 1950s was building with blocks, their games happening in the same space separated by 60 years, but compressed into a single moment in the house's memory. In what had been a nursery, I saw the most disturbing overlap, multiple versions of what was clearly the same room across different decades, the furniture changing, the wallpaper different, but the fundamental space the same. And in that space, I saw births and deaths, celebrations and tragedies, all the significant moments that had happened in this room over a century, all playing back at once. A woman giving birth in the 1890s overlapping with a child dying of fever, in the 1920s overlapping with a nursery being converted to a storage room in the 1970s. The house remembered everything equally, gave no preference to happy or sad moments, just recorded and replayed all of human experience with the same neutral preservation. I started to feel overwhelmed by the accumulation of memory. Every room was crowded with ghosts that weren't really ghosts, just recordings, impressions the house had kept of everyone who'd ever lived here, and all of them playing back simultaneously, creating a cacophony of overlapping lives, decades compressed into moments, a century of human existence happening all at once in every corner of the building. I returned to the ground floor, intending to leave, but I was drawn to the parlor again. The translucent figures were still there, still having their conversations from different eras, still unaware of each other and of me. But now I could see myself among them, not just the 30-second delayed version, but multiple versions, showing me in different locations in the room, recording every position I'd occupied, every movement I'd made since entering the house. I realized the house wasn't just recording me, it was collecting me, creating a comprehensive record of my time here, preserving every moment from multiple angles, building up a complete memory of my presence. And when I left, those recordings would remain, would continue to play back, would become part of the permanent collection of memories the house maintained. I wondered how many of the translucent figures I was seeing were people who'd left the house decades ago, who were still alive somewhere else, living normal lives, completely unaware that this Victorian in Savannah was still playing back their movements, still showing them as they'd been when they lived here. The house didn't distinguish between the living and the dead, it just recorded everyone equally and replayed them all simultaneously, creating a permanent archive of everyone who'd ever crossed its threshold. I left the house, but I could feel it recording me as I walked out, capturing my exit, adding my departure to its collection. And I knew that right now, even as I write this, the house is playing back my exploration, showing translucent versions of me walking through those rooms, examining furniture, photographing details, becoming part of the overlapping crowd of memories that fill every space. I've tried to understand what I experienced. I've researched the house's history, looking for explanations. The Ashford family lived there for 4 generations, but I found nothing unusual in the records, no occult practices, no unusual events, just a normal, wealthy family living in a grand house for over a century. But somehow the house absorbed them, recorded them, kept them even after they'd left or died. I think old houses do this, but most of them do it so faintly that we don't notice. They keep impressions of the people who lived in them, maintain subtle memories that create that feeling of presence we get in historic buildings. But this Victorian in Savannah does it more powerfully, more comprehensively, more visibly than any other place I've encountered. It doesn't just remember its residents, it actively plays them back, projects them into the rooms they occupied, shows them living their lives on an endless loop. I've wondered if I should warn people about the house. Tell them that if they enter it, they'll be recorded and replayed forever, that their movements and actions will become part of the house's permanent memory, displayed alongside everyone else who ever lived there. But who would believe me? And would it matter? The house has been recording people for over a century, adding to its collection continuously, and no one has ever noticed or objected or realized what was happening. The house is still there, still playing back its memories. If you walk through those rooms, you'll see what I saw: translucent figures from different eras, all occupying the same space simultaneously, all preserved in the house's memory and replayed continuously. And if you stay long enough, you'll start to see yourself among them, your own translucent form, offset by 30 seconds or a minute, showing you what you just did, proving that the house has recorded you and added you to its collection. And that recording will last forever. Long after you've left Savannah, long after you've forgotten about that Victorian house, your translucent form will still be there, still walking through those rooms, still being played back alongside everyone else who ever entered. The house will keep you, preserve you, show you as you were on the day you visited, adding you to the crowded collection of memories that fill every corner of every room. I'm part of that collection now, somewhere in Savannah, in an abandoned Victorian that's been frozen in legal limbo for 20 years. A translucent version of me is walking through rooms, photographing furniture, watching the overlapping memories of 4 generations of Ashfords. And it will keep doing that forever, playing back my exploration over and over, adding my memory to all the others the house has collected. The house remembers. It always remembers. And once you've been there, it never lets you go.